his time.
Here goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, good morning. Well done you if you're up this bright and early on a Sunday. God will smile on you favourably. It's a beautiful morning, isn't it, coming into London this morning. The sun rising up above the Thames, a big golden ball of delight. I think we're set for a pretty decent day according to the barometer. I hope it's the same where you are. And got a lot to talk about today. I've woken up in the wee small hours, cast my eyes in between the sheets of the newspapers and picked out some absolutely stonking stories. There's a good Sunday slew of matters to chew over this morning, and we're going to be doing all of that and more and peppering the show with news and views. It's not going to be particularly opinion light, so strap yourselves in, get ready for a roller coaster of, well, I don't know, roller coaster of news and views and chasing away the early morning blues. And if you want to be part of the communal catharsis, come and join me on my virtual therapist's couch. Let it all out. Breathe a big sigh of relief so we can start afresh the week tomorrow, feeling like we've got all of those grizzlies off our chest. The number to call, and it's not like one of those weirdo numbers you have to pay for it. Oh no, it is your standard network rate. All of this, it's basically free therapy, my company while you're still in bed. Normally that'd be a premium number, wouldn't it? But oh no, it isn't. It's 03444 99 1000. It costs the same as phoning your grandma, which you really have to do today. It's a Sunday and she misses you. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message, 03444 99 1000, or indeed leave me a cheeky little voice note. Keep it clean so I get to keep my job. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send me a text message. Now, if you go down that route, you have to write the word talk before your text. That way we can predict its passage off the satellites in space all the way down the masts into my studios here, because if you don't, it's going to crash onto Earth like that old Soviet piece of space junk that no one quite knew where it was going to land. So write talk before your message. We're on X at talkTV, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined for the next 2 hours by my absolute favourite of mine.
No.
This is going to be a good 2 hours, isn't it? It's Mr. Duncan Barks, broadcaster, and what else would you put in your title, your honorifics?
Political commentator.
Political commentator. Hack.
Pub bore.
Yeah.
All of those things.
Former Farage aide, actually, is something, you know.
Yeah.
Get that clock going back and,
long time ago.
All that stuff.
I like being here on your couch.
I'm good, I'm glad. Although you didn't like that chair earlier, did you?
I didn't like that. It's an awful chair. We had to change it at the last minute.
Not ergonomically adept.
I was literally squatting on the floor, which is not a good place to be.
Well, you know, you come over here during the night times, you never know what you're going to find happening in the corner of the
Very
studio.
True, yeah.
Well, you know, apparently if you're a retired police officer and you open your front door, you never know what you're going to find either, and there's a good chance it might be some of your past colleagues. Duncan, talk me through this story, because it's mad.
It is mad. It's the front page of the Sunday Telegraph this morning, Alex. A headline, retired policeman arrested for thought crime tweet. Now, I think the listeners to Talk will be aware we seem to have a run of these stories over the last few months. You've got people who take to social media, they have an opinion that some people might not like, and then all of a sudden there's a knock at the door, and there's the old fuzz, quite a few of them, who want to come in, have a conversation. This is another story about a retired special constable. So this is someone who kind of, you would expect, would know the law, who is relatively a law-abiding person. For the record, no laws have been broken. He took part on X and made some comments about the pro-Palestinian marches that we've seen in London over the many, many months since October 2023. His name is Julian Fulks. He's from Gillingham. He was handcuffed at his home by 6 officers from Kent Police, the force that he had served or served with for a decade. This is after he challenged a supporter of the pro-Palestinian marches on X. And we can get into the reads of this a little bit later on and say what he actually said. But let's just have some context here. Just imagine this. Police with body-worn cameras turned up. And they also had pepper spray and batons. This guy is 71 years old. They searched his property, including his books. And one of the books he had was by Douglas Murray.
Wow.
Oh, I know, it could be a crime in itself. We'll get into this in a second. Officers, apparently, according to this Telegraph piece, were shown as a result of some of the footage that has been seen by been monitored by the cameras that the police were wearing. Concerns about a shopping list containing bleach, tinfoil and gloves that was drawn up by his wife. Right? He's given
I laugh. It's not funny, actually. It's harrowing.
It is. It's quite terrifying. He's given a statement or an interview to the Telegraph saying nobody is really safe. Free speech is clearly under attack. The public needs to see what's happening and be shocked. And the Telegraph are taking this line. It's the latest in a string of heavy-handed police responses to lawful expression, because, of course, their columnist Alison Pearson several months ago was questioned at home by 2 officers over a post on social media, as we know. So his house was searched. Officers seized his electronic devices, stuck him in a waiting police van. They rifled through his most personal belongings. I mean, the list is quite comprehensive.
There are some really sort of poignant parts of this story. It's worth actually, because I think what they went to sort of, you know, question him about was a tweet which potentially missed 4 words at the front to clarify exactly what it meant. He basically said, in response to someone saying, I'm on a pro-Palestine march, but how dare you call me an anti-Semite? And he had been alarmed by things that had taken place at an airport in Russia, where Israeli passengers had been intercepted. And he commented on this, something along the lines of, go to Heathrow and round up the Jews, or something like that. But what he meant was, why? What are you going to do next? Go to Heathrow and round up the Jews. It was basically, he was sort of in support of, you know, that definitely not happening and not wanting that to happen. But, you know, clearly someone's decided, it seems to me, that they thought that he was being sincere and suggesting this as some kind of instruction. Whereas if you read it, you could probably look at that and realise that the nuance, you know, is there. But then even if, this sounds terrible, but even if he had sort of made that as a sincere, disgusting comment, pepper spray, 6 police officers, they smell it like, didn't they rifle through drawers and find police files about a daughter of his that was tragically in a car accident in Ibiza, and they were sort of rifling through all of this stuff going, oh, shame.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
commenting on his bookshelf going, well, that's very Brexity, isn't it?
But I mean, if you turn to the
mad.
inside pages of the Telegraph, there are more pictures of what happened. So for listeners to talk, all of these pictures have come from the footage from the body cams that the police wear. So that's why you've got these pictures in the paper. You know, you've got police holding up copies of The War on the West by Douglas Murray. You've got them handling a copy of The Spectator magazine. You know, I mean, it's genuinely shocking.
It's mad.
The other part of this, I mean, bear in mind he's a retired special constable, is that he was locked in a police cell for 8 hours and interrogated on suspicion of malicious communications.
Why can't they just send... Even, I don't think anyone should go to anybody's door for, you know, a comment like that. But why couldn't they just say, excuse me, sir, we've read something on Twitter. What do you mean by this?
Yeah.
I was actually meaning that's the last thing I'd want to happen. Oh, right, yeah, get that now. OK, sorry to... That's the most it should ever be.
It is, and here's the thing.
If anything.
With all of these cases with Alison Pearson, or what we're reading about this morning in the Sunday Telegraph, and of course, a while ago, we had the story from in the Times about the... do you remember the parents?
Oh, and the WhatsApp group.
The WhatsApp group.
Absolutely
and the police turned up. What I think, for me, the baseline of all of this is there'll be people listening this morning who are sick and tired of the crime and antisocial behaviour they see on a daily, if not hourly basis, in their neighbourhoods, in their streets. I see it all of the time, right? And I never see it challenged, yet you read these stories where a dozen coppers can turn up at someone's front door, put someone in a cell for 8 hours because they said something that, might be a little bit provocative or misunderstood on social media. And I think that's where people get really angry.
But also, I mean, it is sort of the dystopian element of we all live now, whether we recognise it or not. And I've really actually palpably felt things shifting. We were discussing this in the makeup room, weren't we? Not that you can tell that I've had my makeup done. Duncan, on the other hand, does look beautiful.
The makeup person here is brilliant because she hides the bags under the eyes remarkably well.
I just look like a bag.
You don't look like a bag. You're looking glorious this morning. As I said to you, you're my favourite right-wing female.
Thank you. I do wake up in the morning looking a bit like Rod Stewart after a heavy night, but, you know, it's amazing what they can do.
You carry off the leopard skin trousers remarkably well.
I know. Well, it's all hidden below the desk. It's a shame. Thank you to Clinique and to the work of Claire. But I mean, what I realised, we're talking about this in the makeup room, but how much stuff has shifted. Because we have been living in a prison cell before these horrible, you know, dreadful optic events started happening, police actually knocking on doors for tweets. We've been living in a prison cell inside our own minds for decades now. We were talking, weren't we, about how in the Blair years you couldn't even say, well, immigration maybe, you couldn't even say the I word without someone going, ooh, that's really fruity. Same with where, you know, the early stages of UKIP saying, I want to leave the EU. What? What kind of a racist are you? You want to leave a trading bloc? And it was palpable to me. The sort of fulcrum moment of how things have changed was Lucy Powell on Any Questions doing the whole routine of when Tim Montgomery brought up the rape gang saying, well, your dog whistle. They've gotten away with this for so long. It's been hammered into us for 2 decades. And now, all of a sudden, when she said that, how... you know, 6 months ago, before the sort of grooming gang things took off on X, as, you know, thank you to Elon Musk, really, for that. She would have got away with that. That would have been a normal thing to say. And we all lived under the fear of people thinking we were xenophobes or racist.
You're right.
Or
I mean, I've seen it as someone who, you know, used to do nightly phone-in talk radio for many years in London and indeed elsewhere. And you would have, there would be a culture in terms of, and I don't want this to be too Anaraki, but production staff who are like, we can't talk about that because that'll mean a load of racists will phone up. And you go, well, hang on a second, if someone's got an opinion, who are you to say that they're racist? Have they got concerns about immigration? Who are you to say they can't
Not this talk radio station, I hasten to add.
Well,
definitely not got those kind of weird woke presenters.
That's why I'm very happy to be here. But, you know, you have those conversations. So a culture was created, and I think you're right, it was the Blair Brown era, where to question immigration, to question about whether or not we should remain in the EU, there's this kind of like fear that was generated, which is, well, we can't go too near that because we might be branded as some kind of xenophobe or some kind of racist. And the problem with that is, all it does is it pushes people's concerns further underground and they fester and they become something nastier and more severe, which is why the media need to talk about these issues like we do here on Talk, and politicians need to talk about these issues because they need an outlet. And as we're seeing now with some of the political polling, particularly with Reform, and we might come on to a story a little bit later on, we're seeing people in this country going, Yeah, I've got concerns about this.
And I can say them now.
And I can say them, and actually I probably want to support a party who's prepared to say them as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is what is so fascinating. Maybe the sort of key moment was Donald Trump being re-elected. And when you look at how vitriolic and nasty and terrifying, frankly, that campaign was, terrifying. All the things they threw in his path to try and derail him. And he still made it. I think all of a sudden the right wing and the quiet right wing, the shy right, suddenly went, this is our era.
But
it's changed
I don't
now.
know if it's about right or left. I mean, I think increasingly my political mindset is changing to right or wrong. Okay, as opposed
exactly.
to right or left.
Right.
And I think the majority of people in this country, British people, are fair and they're tolerant. But when they think that they're having the mick taken out of them, either by politicians or by people arriving into this country illegally and getting everything given to them, when a lot of people in this country can't get access to GP's appointments or indeed, you know, can afford to rent something cheaply, look at all of those issues, people go, hang on a second, that is not fair.
Right.
And that's why things are changing.
I went out for lunch yesterday, some very dear friends of mine who live in Somerset but have a place in London. And they've got a daughter at university in London.
Yeah.
They live in sort of Fulham, that area.
Yeah.
And they said that when she's like, you know, if she's staying over at their house, if she's been on a night out, or they go and meet her at the tube station now.
Yeah.
Because they said it's and Fulham's a nice set. That Fulham was sort of like this, you know, quite middle class. If you can afford to live in Fulham, you're doing all right.
It's the Waitrose part of London.
It's the Waitrose part of London, and but they're like, you know, the amount of people loitering around, the sort of the look and feel, the landscape of the streets in London has changed so irrevocably that they're worried about their daughter, who's of university age, just walking from the tube station home, and that didn't sound. And I don't think they were being sort of hypersensitive. Because that is what it's like. Where I live in London, it's a gauntlet. You can tell there's clearly some sort of migrant hotel around the corner because the complexion has changed anyway. In the 4 years I've lived where I live in London, it's changed. But you can tell somehow, because even when I was in Devizes the other day, walking down the street, I was like, oh, they're here as well. You can tell who they are, the people who have come off a boat, because they're so, I don't know, they don't look like they're in gainful employ. They're loitering and they kind of have a sort of slightly wild-eyed, scruffy appearance. And you just think, you especially somewhere like, you know, rural Wiltshire, you're like, that's weird. But what's interesting now, of course, is Labour are trying to now get back in the game. You know, they're the party of government. They should be able to do something about this. They're going to have a big immigration announcement next week, tomorrow, I think. And Yvette Cooper has created a 69-page dossier on how they're going to clamp down, which is basically, if you want to come over, you have to have a worker's visa and a university degree.
Well, you've got this on the front page of the Telegraph here, haven't you? Skilled migrants will need degrees if they want a job in Britain. You're right. This is Labour's kind of shift towards, well, we need to demonstrate that we realise immigration is an issue at the top of most people's agenda in this country. And Yvette Cooper, who's written a piece for the Telegraph, saying this new system, saying that skilled migrants will need degrees if they want a job in this country, would be underpinned by 5 core principles. She says, first, migration must come down so the system is properly managed and controlled. Secondly, the immigration system must be linked to skills and training requirements here in the UK. Third, the system must be fair and effective with clearer rules agreed by Parliament. Fourth, the rules must be respected and enforced, from our crackdown on illegal working to the deportation of foreign criminals. And finally, the system must support integration and community cohesion.
Oh yeah, how are you going to do that?
So
then?
some warm words there, but I suspect quite a few listeners this morning to talk will be thinking, well, you know, why has it taken so long? Too little, too late. You know, the horse has bolted, hasn't it?
Let's get down the details of this after the next break, because I really want to sort of ask you about the application of those principles and also the cozying up to the EU and this sort of like youth mobility scheme and some information from the ONS yesterday on projected migration figures, because I have a feeling this is going to unravel pretty darn quickly. Right, don't go anywhere. We're going to be giving you all of the details. Well, we don't know what the details are, but, you know, we're going to be chewing over what we do know so far and basically telling you, the listeners of Talk, that they ain't going to get it right, are they? We want to know your thoughts as well. 03444991000 if you'd like to chat with Duncan and I. We're poised and ready to take your call. You can use that number to send a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number to text. Put Talk before your message. We're back after this.
going to be a big, beautiful deal, I'm sure Trump will tell us. And it's from the UK perspective, I cannot see this as anything but good news. It's a great Brexit dividend, and isn't it ironic that Brexit dividend should go to Keir Starmer, and full credit to him for getting this over the line. But of course, he was Remainer-in-Chief. He was the guy who tried to overturn Brexit, tried to do everything he could to stop Brexit happening, and now maybe this Brexit benefit.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show, and welcome to you if you arrived on a boat yesterday. I doubt you're listening. Less welcome, to be honest. But this is the point, isn't it? You know, Labour are going to do this crackdown on information. Yvette Cooper riding to the rescue with their big dossier saying, you've got to take us seriously. We're going to be the ones to bring down the numbers. And yet, just yesterday, I think it was the ONS, brought out a report. Previously, they had projected that migration into the country would settle, net migration settle at around 350,000, which is a horrifyingly large number. And then they've had to revise that and gone, oh no, it's probably going to be over 500,000 year on year. Oh, and plus it's not going to contribute to GDP. Yeah. And you think to yourself, what sort of crazy cultural vandalism is this? Because the last time there was any kind of report on demographic projections of the UK, and that report basically said by 2050, we're potentially looking at a country where native Brits are the minority of the population. 2050 is that tipping point. And that was based upon migration settling around 200,000. Yep. We are being hurtled towards, I hate to say it, now I'm going to sound like a sort of mad ethno-nationalist, but we are being hurtled towards sort of a British eradication event if we don't get on top of these numbers. And so let's go back through the pledges that we're anticipating Yvette Cooper's going to lay out.
So Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, ahead of, I think, a proper announcement tomorrow, has written a piece in the Sunday Telegraph. I'll give the headline. After years of Tory failure, it is time to restore control of our borders. I mean, that's the first thing we should chew over. Let's remember it was the new Labour government of 1997 to 2010 that had a very relaxed view when it came to people coming to this country. But this is obviously a little bit of an opportunity to have a bash at the Tories.
Which is also fair, because let's be honest, they did preside over record levels of inward migration. Indeed. Under Mr Boris Johnson, who we will be speaking about later. And
also, let's just talk about the context of why this is happening all of a sudden. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Yvette Cooper and the Labour Party, the Labour government, have decided to make this announcement, looking at the polls where you have reform riding high in many of the polls from various polling companies, and we know that immigration increasingly is number one, if not in the top two priorities of voters. So Labour here are thinking, hang on a second, bit of a threat when it comes to reform. We need to do something. So we got this announcement, and we got this piece by Yvette Cooper in the Sunday Telegraph today, and she talks about this new system which will have 5 core principles. I'll tell you what.
Should we go through and bash each one?
I was going to say, why don't I bowl them at you?
Oh, right.
All right, and you can have a big bat, and then you can whack a 4 or 6. Does that work?
I'm getting ready. Hold on, I'm getting my stance.
Number 1. This is the 5 core principles. First, that net migration must come down so the system is properly managed and controlled.
Net migration must come down. That's what we've heard for the past 15, 20 odd years, and it's gone up and up and up. And unless you've got the core policies underneath, or unless a government, I think, is willing to actually just put from top down a cap on this thing, anything else is rearranging the loungers on the deck as the Titanic goes down, isn't it? So that's just a sort of completely vacuous, overused, drawn-out pledge that has never gotten us anywhere.
I think your ball's just bounced over the boundary. Right, second one, here we go, ready? That the immigration system must be linked to skills and training requirements here in the UK so that no industry is allowed to rely on immigration to fill its skills shortages.
Oh, haven't we heard that time and again, that actually we need to train people up here instead of importing people from abroad? And this whole idea that we're bringing in skilled workers in key sectors, when everything I can see when I look around me is a load of people living on benefits and doing absolutely nothing that requires any kind of talent. And you have to ask yourself, so I was told once upon a time that when it came to cabinet in the Conservative government, and they said, right, we're going to bring down migration, this is what we're going to do. And they went round the table, and of course, cabinet ministers don't actually do anything themselves. They just read notes that the civil service have given them. And DEFRA said, well, we can't be part of this because we need seasonal workers. No, you don't. Anyone can pick a blimmin' vegetable. It's not a skilled job. You don't need to be from Lithuania to pull up a blimmin' parsnip.
No, but let's talk about that, because those jobs, and I live in a part of Sussex where there's a lot of farming, there's a lot of agriculture, and they can't find local people to do those jobs. So how do you fix it?
Well, I think that surely you can find local people to do those jobs. There's plenty of people who are sitting there on benefits saying, I can't go to work because I've got anxiety, or maybe some fresh air might help you, sunshine. My mum, who's from the market town of Evesham, when she was during her holidays when she was young, she used to do this sort of work. It always used to be done by Brits. And, you know, if you're feckless and lazy and you don't want to go to work and you wouldn't get out of bed for less than 40 grand, guess what? The rug's going to be pulled from under your feet and you're going to have to, or you will face consequences.
Go and pick some apples.
Go and get those apples out those trees. How hard can it be? But it's, you know, like you go around all the different sectors. So DEFRA will say we need the seasonal workers. Department for Business, we need people in hospitality. Anyone can pull a pint. I'm sorry, but you just can. You know, and then you get all the way around the universities, education ministers saying, well, you know, we need the foreign students. If your university is that dependent on foreign students to stay open because no one wants to do your course in the UK, you should close down with market forces. I'm sorry, but ta-ta. And, you know, the only one that I think is fair enough ring fencing is the NHS. But again, you know, this whole pledge, if we need to train up our own, why do successive governments constantly put a cap on how many doctors and nurses or doctors we're allowed to educate in the UK?
No, don't get it. Never have.
Never got that.
Do you want the third core principle?
Come on.
Okay, that the system must be fair and effective, with clearer rules agreed by Parliament in areas such as respect for family life, to prevent confusion or perverse outcomes.
Oh, right. So Parliament's going to actually now somehow usurp the Supreme Court, which sits above Parliament, which also takes its instruction from the ECHR. So next time a sort of Abdullah Beatty, whatever he's called, has his fourth attempt at staying in the country because he's had a crucifix tattooed on his neck, he's successful. Or the next time some sort of, you know, person from Albania says, my son don't like chicken nuggets.
Chicken nuggets.
That's right. Parliament's going to take control of that, because I'm sorry, the Blairite government were the one who handed control of the Attorney General. What was it? Not the Attorney General. Who's the one who used to have all the control? The Chancellor of the Duchy or something like that.
Duchy of Lancaster?
No, one of them. There's someone in there who used Lord Chancellor. That's what I was looking for. The Lord Chancellor used to be able to say, no, I override this and that person's being deported, but that power was all handed away. Is the Labour government going to suddenly come out of the ECHR and scrap the Supreme Court and all of the ridiculous legislation connected to human rights that actually means these people keep having successful appeals with lefty judges? No.
Fourth core principle, courtesy of Yvette Cooper, that was definitely a 6 that you whacked, that the rules must be respected and enforced, from our crackdown on illegal working to the deportation of foreign criminals. Yeah, how's that going?
Well, it's the same thing. same as above. But also, you know, everyone all over the UK lives somewhere, even if you're in the sticks, you live somewhere where there's some dodgy hand car wash, a nail bar, a vape shop, a souvenir shop.
Barbers.
Or the barbers, 5,000 barbers. There was one barber in Shrewsbury, apparently.
Yeah.
I don't know, is it Shrewsbury or Shrewsbury?
Oh, there is a correct way.
I always want to say Shrewsbury, actually.
Shrewsbury.
If you're from there, let me know.
Yeah.
But, you know, had a turnover of like £1.36 million, despite having like 7 customers. Yeah. You're like, we're being gaslit. We can see this on every single street. Where is immigration knocking on those doors?
What's really interesting about that is, again, it goes back to the point we made earlier. There was this climate where you certainly weren't allowed to suggest that maybe there was something dodgy going on there, because, again, that might be
racist.
You might be branded as racist. But recently, the National Crime Agency did a load of raids, didn't they?
Yeah.
At such establishments that you've just mentioned, and what a surprise. I'll tell you, I was shocked. You know, they found drugs, they found stacks of cash that didn't tally up with, you know, people going in to have their beard trimmed. I mean, so The proof is in the pudding,
But
isn't
also,
it?
you know, if they've managed to do those raids, just make them sweep around the country. It's not going to happen.
Have you got time for the fifth one?
Yeah, we can just squeeze in that fifth.
Okay, the fifth core principle, and this is what we've talked about this before, I just don't know how you do this, that the system must support integration and community cohesion.
Here we go. So we're going to
How
suddenly
do you do that?
We're suddenly going to go to the part of Leicestershire where fewer than 50% of people can even speak English, let alone have it as their first language, and suddenly force them all to learn English or else. You know, make mosques. What do you call them? Ceremonies, sermons, services? I don't know what they're called. Those will be conducted in English. Suddenly say, right, that's it, we're banning the burqa. You think Labour are really going to do those things? Oh, we're going to eradicate faith schools because that goes against integration. How can you turn around and go up to communities who basically don't even like this country or have nothing to do with it, who live in balkanised blocks? And Hare Hills is a prime example of this, when there were the riots there. And you just looked at all these people who are like barbecuing goats on the side of the road one minute and then crashing police cars the next. And you think, what, you're going to go in there, wave a magic wand and go, right, you all have to sing God Save the King, fly the Union flag, learn English, have a cup of tea, mow your lawn on a Sunday. It's just
I just don't know how you can make integration and cohesion happen unless people really want it to. In the interests of balance, shall I read the final paragraph of Yvette Cooper's piece, just so we can see where she's going with this? Throughout our history, Britain has been strengthened by people coming to start new businesses, study at our universities, contribute to our sporting or creative excellence, or become doctors and nurses in our NHS. But to be successful, effective and fair, our immigration system must be properly controlled and managed.
It's one of those things. Immigration has enriched this country. It's a bit like when you talk about the NHS, you've got to always put in our hard-working doctors and nurses first.
Yeah.
It's one of those stupid mantras you hear all the time. Hasn't it been wonderful? Cultural enrichment. And it's like, yeah, that's what I'm seeing right now. When I walk down my street, cultural enrichment, the nuclear scientists all there to help us move into 21st century futurism. Right, we're going to take a short break now, and after that we're going to be doing more front pages. Don't go anywhere.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, right, we're going to rattle through the front pages in a sort of comically fast fashion because some of the headlines are not even worth talking about, but we're going to let you know what is on them nonetheless. So here we go. Sunday Times starts off with Asylum Hotel King becomes a billionaire. This really sticks in the core, doesn't it? When you get these people who are just making loads of money from sort of enabling a system of...
There was a hotel company recently that was asked outright if they would ever, I can't remember which one it was,
I remember that. I don't want to start libelling businesses.
No,
I remember
that's why
Belvedere Hotels Limited were in the papers lately.
I don't want to name because I might get it wrong, but there was a company that recently said, they were asked by the media, are you ever going to allow your hotels to be used to house people who have come to this country illegally? And they said, nope, we're not going to do it. And they got a flurry of support. I mean, I get it. If you're a businessman or businesswoman, I can understand why you might look at a Home Office contract or a contract from Serco and go, yeah, I'll do that, right? But I mean, in terms of local cohesion and reputation, it's not good, is it?
It's blimmin' terrible.
No.
But also, it's some of the hotels that are being approached by the Home Office, like, you know, sort of 16th century castles and spa retreats. And you're like, what are we going to do next? Move them into Windsor Castle because it's got lots of free annexes. I mean, come on. Right, here we go. I don't know what you have to say about this. Danny Dyer, front page of Sun. I was off my nut on EastEnders. A lot of Valium and diazepam.
Well, having watched EastEnders recently, I think I would have to be off my nut to continue watching it. I find it remarkably depressing, that programme. When did you last watch it?
Do you know, I actually was flicking through channels the other day and settled on, I didn't settle, but for a few minutes had a bit of EastEnders. I haven't watched it for ages. And I thought, you know, when we were growing up as kids in the 90s, because that's the last time I properly watched it, and everyone's sort of pushing people downstairs and, you know, ostracising people and excommunicating the family.
Or indeed Arthur
getting
getting a little bit vexed that the potatoes aren't doing what he wants them to do in his allotment. Well, the kind of storylines, weren't they?
But you used to think to yourself that is what family life was like.
Yeah.
It's like brilliant.
Well, now it's just like doom, gloom, and Danny Dyer was on a lot of Valium, apparently.
So this is again, basically, you know, Labour's panic over reform. We just spoke about it. Clearly, Number 10 are doing the whole we want front pages where it matters, i.e. the Mail on Sunday. Commit any crime and you're out. Migrants will be warned. Well, you're out until some blimmin' judge decides that your, you know, stepson once removed can't buy the computer games he likes back in Bulgaria or something.
But I do think the general public are getting wise to this. I mean, Number 10 this morning will be pleased with some of these front pages and the headlines because they are saying what they want them to say. But I think the majority of people in this country have got wise to it, and I look around and just go, well, you know, it's not happening, is it?
Exactly. Well, exactly. Proof of the pudding's in the eating. Similar thing, you can tell there's been a barrage out of Number 10 to try and get favourable headlines on the Sunday papers because the Sunday Express, new crackdown on immigration lawyers abusing the system. Yeah. Now, this is interesting because I honestly think there will be immigration lawyers out there who are in direct communications with the people traffickers.
Really?
I reckon, yes. Yeah, there's going to be people out there. Because how do they know when these people come off boats and all of a sudden it's like, I've lost my passport and I want right to remain and I'm gay and I come from somewhere where they don't like gay. They somehow know where to go, the phone number to call, the person, and there will be... I'm not saying that anyone in particular, but I bet there are some right dodgy ones.
There might be some mileage in your view there that I think some of the charities might be in a position to support those who've come to this country with the kind of information you've just outlined.
I mean, if you're an immigration lawyer and you're just sort of, you know, getting... Because it's sort of taxpayers' money as well. It's not like these
money,
migrants
Alex.
themselves
are,
money. You know, paying these lawyers. Yeah. But you can be doing a fine business at the moment and you know all the loopholes. You know what's there. You've got to say this in your hearing. You've got to say that in your hearing. Yeah. And you can get 3, 4, 5 bites of the blimmin'...
It's true.
Bites of, what is it?
Cherry. It's a cherry. Yeah, it's a big cherry.
Each time. And I am certain that there will be, and I'm not saying all immigration lawyers are crooked, far from it, but I'm absolutely certain that immigration lawyers abusing the system. There are those that are clearly taking the proverbial, who must know that someone should be deported and are sort of making a bob out of it anyway. But a lawyer's a lawyer. They don't, you know, if you're defending an axe murderer, you don't have to like him or like what you're doing. That is our legal system. But I wonder how much...
I think you might be onto something, and I also think maybe there's a cultural thing within the legal system that if you're working on immigration cases, there may well be a bias, probably a conscious bias, but maybe subconsciously, I don't know, which is just like we've got to do what we can to help this person stay in the country. I think that culture and mindset probably exists. Yeah,
I mean, there's the sort of dual offence of sort of potentially crooked immigration laws, and then the extreme leftist, like bohemian style judges who just want, it's so awful, like the Hugos basically. Hugo Montague Smythe
or Rupert.
Yeah, you're that type. I've got nothing to say about this. Meghan's dad moves to the Philippines. Care. I mean, yeah, who cares?
I'm so bored of that story.
I'm so
Did you
bored.
see the story? I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but I've not had this conversation with anyone recently, and I quite like it with you. Did you see the story of Harry ringing doorbells? Did you see the footage?
I know, with his mates. Like, I need security and armed guards. Hello.
Well, apparently, one of the reports in, I think it was The Sun, and it was yesterday, it was all caught on doorbell, cameras, so he had this footage. He was in this road, and he just rang this doorbell, and then he went half a mile up the road and was ringing a different doorbell, and it's just like, this is a bloke who's so concerned about his security, he's just roaming this street randomly, ringing doorbells. And of course the question
like a
is...
knocker.
Pardon?
Is this called cherry knocking?
I don't know. That's not a term I'm
a
familiar with.
cherry-themed programme.
But, oh, well, we used to play a game called Knockdown Ginger. Is that what you're thinking
That's what
of?
Tech Up just said in my
Well,
ear,
you do a
Knockdown
runner.
Ginger. I thought it's called cherry knocking or something. If you go and knock on... Maybe I just got obsessed with the word cherry ever since, five bites of the cherry.
Where I come from, Alex, that means something entirely different. But Knockdown Ginger was you ring the doorbell and run away. Anyway, go on.
Talking about cherries, front page of the Daily Star, one of my favourite publications in the world, is farmers love a roll in the hay. So how many cherries have been popped?
Excellent.
Amongst bales, that's what we want to know.
Nice link. What's the detail on that story? Is it an ex-errand or young farmer?
Considering Ted just said in my ear, don't say that again. The detail is, randy rural folk say they're the best in bed. Frisky farmers reckon they're the hottest lovers in Britain. Nearly 70% of those polled bragged about being incredible in the sack.
Well, there's nothing else to do.
Well, I think farming's quite involved, to be honest.
Well, it is, but I mean, in your downtime, in your spare time...
When it rains and you can't take the combine out...
What else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do? Yeah. Surrounded by all that fresh air and fecundity.
Go and have a romp.
And then the Observer's just got some really nice portrait of all the Trumps.
Oh, that's nice. That's a nice picture.
Yeah, that's a good picture.
Yeah, the Observer's under new ownership now, isn't it? It looks, if you turn the inside pages, it looks like a bit of a comic.
It's
just a bit weird, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Isn't
it's a funny layout.
Some nice pictures.
It's got a sort of woke font. And,
it does have a woke font, you're right. Yeah.
Oh, woke font and lots of... Yeah, it's like magazine-y, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I kind of like... When we went from having broadsheets to Berliners, I was sort of slightly disappointed.
I know.
But then, as a woman, you try and get in the Telegraph out on a train or something. It's really hard to manage.
No, but it's a good thing, because if you don't want someone to sit next to you on the train, it is the perfect shield, isn't it?
The right-wing double-page spread.
It puts out a bit of a statement, which is like, do not sit next to me.
Yeah.
And also you're reading the Daily Telegraph, which is pretty leery for some people.
Repellents to many commuters in the outer boroughs of London.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking earlier about whether we have a free speech problem in Britain, the story of the cop who had all the ex-cop who had all the other cops knock on his door for a tweet and the usual sort of ridiculousness. And good old Ted has dug out of the annals this sort of reminder of a pretty sort of awkward conversation between J.D. Vance and our very own Sir Keir Starmer.
Oh.
Look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
The body language. If you're listening on the radio, you wouldn't have been able to see what Keir Starmer does when he's making that comment. J.D. Vance is sitting diametrically opposite, and Sir Keir Starmer crosses his legs like a eunuch, quite frankly. I'm not sure how any man who's sort of not been through the sort of transition process manages to have their legs in that particular arrangement. But he crosses his legs and leans as far away from J.D. Vance as possible, even sort of reaching out the hand like a barrier. And you just thought, no, you've been caught.
He has been caught, and it is interesting to see more and more of these stories like the one we referred to on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph here. But also it's scary, and listening to what the Prime Minister said there in response to J.D. Vance, I don't think he believes it.
No.
We don't have free speech. I mean, it is a fine line, and you know this working in broadcasting, and I know this working in broadcasting. There is a fine line between freedom of speech and some kind of incitement, right? But most people are not in the market to incite stuff. They've just got that view, and they want to articulate that view. And I do think we now live in a climate, and we have done for the last few years, where people are wrongly visited by the police because they said something on social media that might be deemed by some to be a little bit worrying. And you hit the nail on the head earlier, Alex, which is, in the case of this guy in the Telegraph today, this retired special constable, Julian Fawkes, something on social media that maybe could have been better put. Right? If they turned up at his door, one police officer just going, mate, just want some clarification of what you meant by that, that would have resolved it, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Completely.
I'd recommend you take it down because people could read that wrong.
Exactly. Instead, 6 officers, pepper spray and batons. They didn't use them, but they came with them.
Rifling through all his possessions.
Rifling through his possessions. And for those people who've just tuned in or logged on or whatever, the Telegraph have pictures of this because they've got access to the body cam footage from Kent Police, holding up books, going, oh, what's this? Oh, it's The War on the West by Douglas Murray.
I love the idea that if you were sort of anti-Semites who wanted to round up Jews at the airport, that's probably not going to be your sort of, you know, complexion of your bookshelf, is it?
Or indeed a copy of the Spectator magazine.
Right, exactly.
You know, and then put in a prison cell for 8 hours. I mean, this stuff is
what
terrifying.
disgusts me, I don't think that this country has said or done or protested enough about Lucy Connolly. That woman who's in prison for 32 months, not even allowed visitation rights, when in the heat of anger, she put something about asylum hotels and then deleted it 2 hours later, and she's in prison while there are people who go about on the stab and nicking stuff who are nowhere near a jail cell. We spent millions of taxpayers' money on Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, who'd only been a UK citizen for the best part of 3 seconds when she went back to Iran and was held under house arrest. No one's saying that was good or nice or pleasurable. We spent millions of taxpayers' money defending her, trying to get her back home to a country that she wasn't, you know, hadn't been a citizen of for a long time. And then Lucy Connolly's just done a tweet in our own prison cells. People should be... probably get the knock from the police for saying this, but I'm surprised people haven't demonstrated over this, because it is wild. It is crazy.
She should not be in prison. And she should be released as soon as possible, but she won't be, and I'll tell you why. Because it's all about governments saving face, and they can't be seen to be U-turning. Politicians in general, not just those in this current government, but right across the board, don't like saying they've got things wrong, don't like admitting they've made mistakes.
But she was used as an example, and therefore she is a political prisoner.
I think that's a fair tag to give her. She should be released. I mean, her tweet was an awful tweet. She shouldn't have tweeted what she said, but she knows that because she went for a walk and then came back after a couple and deleted it. And people do things in the heat of the moment. They get angry. And if you look at that woman's backstory, Lucy Connolly's, you know, she lost a child, and she believes that the NHS could have done more to save the life of that child. So emotionally and mentally,
made a blimmin' comment that
fragile.
some people find unpalatable. It never had a proper trial. If it did, they'd have had to prove a causal connection between her tweets and then people doing things, which wouldn't have been provable at all, and she wouldn't have been anywhere near a prison cell. 32 months, no visitation rights. She was used as an example to terrify everyone else. She's a political prisoner. This poor innocent woman, frankly. It is a disgrace. Right, we're going to take a short break now. After that, we're going to be speaking to some of you. Don't go anywhere.
lots of people now who are excited and enthused by the prospect of being in social media, becoming little mini stars, because that's the sort of world we find ourselves in now. Everybody wants fame for 5 minutes, and that was their route to doing it. And I just hope, actually, the fact that they've been convicted reminds the whole of the nation that no matter how crazy an idea you've got in your head, you need to respect people and the community and the country in which you live.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. Let's go straight to the phone line because we've got David in God's own county of Gloucestershire on the blower. All right then, my babber.
Morning, Alex. How are we?
Yeah, I'm very well. Whereabouts in Gloucestershire are you?
I'm in the Forest of Dean.
Hey! Which bit of the Forest of Dean?
Yeah. It's lovely this morning.
Yeah, whereabouts in the forest? Oh, I shouldn't have called you babber. I should have called you butt.
I'm right by the river. I'm in Newnham.
Oh, right by a flood zone down there. Newnham's a bit fancy. That's like the posh bit of the forest, isn't it?
Oh, it is. But the river's very empty at the moment. We're suffering with the weather.
Is it?
Floaty, so
Yeah, just down from Newnham, you've got a really great little place that you can only really pronounce if you're from the Forest of Dean, where they make Severn cider in that wonderful little village of... Well, if you're not from the Forest of Dean, you might call it Orr, because it's A-W-R-E, Orr. But if you're from the forest, it's Arr!
Yeah, it is Orr.
Yeah, Orr. Arr. It's like the most West Country Forest of Dean named place you could come up with. Right, what can I do for you, David?
Well, you were talking about Yvette Cooper's clampdown, and it was basically, like I said to your producer, I said, you must think we were all born yesterday. We all know this is about going after reform, and nobody but a complete idiot will fall for it. They signed that deal last week with India that's going to allow Indian companies to bring Indian people, and I will guarantee that there will be 1 million people next year all coming in, and by the way, they're all Indian, no matter which part of the world they come from.
Well, I mean, I do tend to agree because they say one thing and do another. Now, normally, what do you think about this, Duncan? Because it is kind of normal for a trade agreement to come with relaxation of visa rules, and that's always been the sticking point why we haven't had a deal with India to now, because Modi has wanted to see his young people mobilised, able to come and work in the West, gather more skills, earn a lot of money and bring it back, essentially, is also a big part of it. What did you make of that deal with essentially this sort of no double taxation on Indian workers?
Well, it makes it cheaper, doesn't it, to employ someone who comes to this country as part of the deal from India than it would do someone who is British, because they've got to pay the national insurance at the full whack, right? So that's not great for British people and their employment opportunities, is it? And I mean, the whole idea, and I think we're going to see this with some kind of agreement with the EU coming down the tracks in the next couple of weeks, because what you've got on the table is this idea of the kind of youth mobility scheme, haven't you, which EU countries are desperate to get off the ground in order for young guys in France or Germany or Spain or whatever to come over to the United Kingdom. And it is something that you can negotiate, and it's something that you can use as a way of getting your deal done. But of course, what it does do, if you allow that to happen, is it puts up the migration figures in this country.
Is it. So my suspicion is this. When you talk about the young guys in Europe who might want to come, or girls who might want to come and work in the UK, who are these people? Because when we've had open borders with the EU before, we didn't get a load of Germans coming over to work in a hospitality sector. A lot of the people in Western Europe especially come and work in the jobs where you can get visas, the financial sector or something like that. So who are all these under 30s in the EU who might have been given citizenship or residency, who might be desperate to come to Britain? I reckon it might be people who've turned up ever since Angela Merkel said, come one, come all.
The other thing you've got to consider as well is that if you take the view that you've just articulated, and we're talking, I think it's under 30, isn't it? I think that's the age, isn't it? Under 30,
under 30.
For the youth mobility scheme.
Yeah.
That is, and if you're someone who voted for Brexit in 2016, you don't have to make too much of a leap to go, hang on a second, this is one step closer to freedom of movement, isn't it?
It's freedom of movement with an age cap.
But it's the beginning of maybe greater freedom of movement. You can make the argument it's freedom of movement by the back door. And there was a piece in one of the papers yesterday where the Prime Minister was saying, I think, we need to look to the future, put Brexit behind us, we need to move on from Brexit. Well, that's 17.4 million people who don't believe there was a proper Brexit in the first place, who voted for a number of reasons, not because they're xenophobic or whatever, but they were just a little bit fed up of not being able to have laws in this country that were made in this Parliament. Seemed to be one of the major reasons, certainly why I would have backed Brexit and why I did back Brexit. So, you can't just go, we've got to move on from Brexit, because it was such a significant thing in this country's political history. You've always got to have an eye on the future regarding those voters who said, I don't want to be part of the EU anymore.
But also, what an absolute disgusting undermining of democracy in this country, because what you're talking about is a summit next week, I think it is, with the EU.
Yeah.
And when you delve into the detail of the sorts of things he wants to do, which is access to the single... You've got access to the single market. We still buy and trade with the EU. What he means is essentially rejoining the single market and having a Swiss model where we will pay contributions back to Brussels, and as a reward for paying money to Brussels, we then follow all of their rules, and therefore there's no trade friction. That's basically being in the EU.
It is.
That's what he wants. Plus this sort of youth mobility with the age cap, which is, it's freedom of movement for the under 30s, which when we had freedom of movement before, were we getting 50-year-olds coming from Spain? No, we were getting the under 30s.
No, and you've got to remember, if it wasn't for Brexit, we wouldn't have been able to do the trade deal with India, or indeed the trade deal, which appears we have the basis of one with the United States of America, because as I'm sure listeners to talk know...
Or nationalise the steel works, or renationalise elements of the railways network.
Yeah, so it has given this country a certain amount of freedom.
It is. I mean, it's just disgusting. But let's talk about that one after the next break, because I'm staggered. I'm staggered that he's looking into following a Swiss model. And if he thinks the people of Britain are not going to be alive to this, I mean, Kemi Badenoch's trying to capitalise on this, saying, I'm going to reverse any EU reset if he betrays Brexit. Yeah, great, that's all sort of, well and good, but you ain't going to be here, mate. You're not going to be Prime Minister.
We should talk about that at some point, because I was saying to you when we were having our slap done on our faces, that's makeup, by the way, as opposed to anything else, that I was quite resolute up until last week that Kemi Badenoch will be around for 2 years. I think she'll be gone in the next 6 months.
Yeah, well, I was just having a little text message conversation with a good friend of mine who might lead a party that isn't one of the legacy parties, just then, actually, talking in the advert break. And he was basically saying he thinks there'll be a number of Tories now who are going to get out before the ship goes down totally. So that's going to be very interesting.
I've got money on Suella Braverman joining Reform.
Well, her husband's in, isn't she?
Yeah, it's only a matter of time.
I mean, this is the interesting thing. How many Tories should Reform take, if any? Because if they're going to try and look distinct and say we're not the Conservative Party, if you start letting all these people, rats of a sinking ship come over, you might find you sort of, it'd be very useful to get a few scalps, but you let too many come and it kind of starts working against you. My advice would be, do not take Truss. Oh, I like Liz. She's fun.
No, she might be fun, and she might be, it might be a great night out. But I don't think it'll do Reform UK any favours.
I don't reckon she's got any interest in coming back to frontline politics. What, and be a backbencher? She's got a Prime Minister's sort of, retirement bill, and she's having a good time.
You know what these politicians are like, Alex. They've all got egos. They love the attention. They can't let it go.
Yeah, that's true. But going from Prime Minister to backbencher, I'm not sure that would be up anyone's strata. Anyway, they've got so much more to talk about. We're going to be talking about that Are we essentially rejoining the EU? And what about a return of Boris Johnson? That's coming up after this. I'll see you in just a moment. Stick that kettle on. See you on the other side.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week. It's the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humsley Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's Plank of the Week, he's got a sizable plank.
Yeah.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I've got a message for you. Welcome back to this blockbuster edition of What Just Happened. It really is a good one, I think. It's so funny that people keep calling...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. We've had a fun first hour, haven't we? We're just sort of hurtling around like dodgems, like bumper cars in the headlines this morning. And there's so much to gripe about, which is exactly how I like to start my Sunday, basically.
Therapeutic.
It is very therapeutic.
so.
It's why I call it communal catharsis. It is like having a sort of... we wouldn't be Alcoholics Anonymous, clearly. Well, I'm not far off it, if I'm honest with you. But it's sort of like Brexiteers Anonymous or something, where we can all get together and hold hands and go, isn't the state of the nation pretty grim?
Yeah, I don't want to turn into a cliche, but I do find myself waking up most mornings now being just so angry at the state of the country. So this is very helpful, sitting here on your imaginary couch and, having this therapy session with the rest of the nation.
But I get, like I said, I actually now sort of strut around pigeon-chested when I go into legacy media news studios. They're like, oh, isn't it horrible that And I'm like, yeah, you're well out of touch, aren't you? There's a moment that's happened where now, rather than think, oh gosh, they were going to sneer at me and gripe and be snide and be all, woke, and they're going to think I'm a monster, where I actually wear the monster badge with pride. It's sort of like, we're winning, baby, we're winning. It's nice. This message made me snigger. We were talking about you mentioned Prince Harry, the Ring doorbell, Ring doorbell gate.
Where am I?
Yeah, I need my privacy and my protection.
Who am I looking
Where's my
for?
armed police? Ding dong, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, JB in Aberdeenshire says, "Come on, we all know Harry was selling jam."
There's a story knocking around in one of the papers about Meghan's jam. Apparently, she's not sent out one order yet. I'm surprised she's got any orders, to be honest with you, but I can't remember which paper it is, but it's knocking around that people have tried to buy her jam and jam has not been sent.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
You're not interested, are you?
I tell you, there's nothing about Meghan Markle that ever, unless it turns out that she sort of, I don't know, runs a prisoner of war camp underneath the Montecito mansion, there's nothing about her that interests me. I actually find her tedious.
Yeah, I'm bored of her. Yeah.
Now, the big question, there's going to be a great segue here. Ready?
Go on, then.
You might be bored of Meghan Markle, but are we bored of Boris Johnson? Bojo, that is the question, because we were talking about this in the, as they were, I call him Sir Peter Cardwell then. I've just given him a random knighthood, as Sir Peter Cardwell says, when the cement mixer grinds and they cover us in our stage makeup. We were talking down there about Boris Johnson and the fact that he's like a vulture circling carrion, isn't he? He's sniffing around that carcass of the Conservative Party. Yeah. I don't want to come back. No, I'm just going to appear on lots of news channels.
It's just... You're absolutely right. All of a sudden, Boris Johnson appears to be popping up on TV. I wonder why. I wonder why.
But the big question is, so there's been polling by Luke Trill of...
More in Common.
More in Common, thank you, because I keep getting that name wrong. And he's polled potential sort of changes of leader in the Conservative Party. Here we go again. And discovered that despite Robert Jenrick losing about 5 stone, shaving his head and, sort of coming out a reborn man.
Finding some stuff to believe in.
Yeah, coming out as a hardliner. I like Jenrick, actually. He once came in here during the leadership elections and I shook his hands, and I've never touched hands of such a velveteen, very soft hands.
Do you think does he have manicures, do you think?
I don't know, but
Should we start a rumour?
I've got really gnarly dry hands, and I almost felt ashamed to touch the paw of Jenrick because it was so silky.
He must do.
He must do. That man has got some pretty nice skin.
Real men do not wear and do not use hand cream.
Is that right?
Yeah.
No, well...
Is that a shocking statement?
See, Jenrick, you're not a hardliner after all. Your hands are too soft.
Too soft.
Too soft.
Where are the blisters?
Exactly. Yeah. Last time you picked up a shovel was never. But he may want to pick up a shovel and dig a grave for his party, because even if he came back as leader, apparently it wouldn't move the needle at all. But the same poll suggests that if Boris Johnson were to come back, guess what? Yee-haw, hoo-ha, they would beat reform.
We got this story. We got this story on page 5 of the Mail on Sunday. It's an exclusive. I'm just going to go through some of this. You're right. It talks about the polling for More in Common, concluding that under Boris Johnson, the Tories would beat Reform by 3 points, with Labour in the 3rd place. What makes me laugh, and you know this as well as I do, and I think most Talk listeners and viewers will get it as well. According to Allies, Boris Johnson expects Nigel Farage's Reform UK to self-destruct before the next election, at which point he would swoop back in to rescue the Tories. Allies of the former Prime Minister have said, i.e. his spokesperson, who's been phoning up Glenn Owen, political editor of the Mail on Sunday, going, Glenn, right, this is what's going to happen. You've seen the polls from More in Common. Boris is the answer. Do you fancy his story?
Well, it's very easy. All that Reform have to do is paper the red wall with pictures of Boris Johnson at that COP20, whatever it was. He loves a bit of net zero, and he loves a bit of immigration. And he loved as well, let us not forget, he loved all that Stonewall stuff. Oh, he was all for the rainbow lanyards.
An ally said Boris is convinced that the wheels will come off the Reform bandwagon within 3 years, and they will be found wanting in the areas where they have won power, and voters will tire of all the fruitcakes and loonies they have in their ranks. Now, which famous politician branded anyone who's part of UKIP as a fruitcake? Who was that?
David Cameron.
And what happened to David Cameron?
But it doesn't work. If Boris Johnson thinks that insulting Reform voters by suggesting Reform is fruitcakes, lunatics and closet racists, that is not going to win you affection. I think that Boris Johnson's had his day. I know the polling says something right now, but he talks about the idea that Reform's going to be found wanting. And when they announced this policy of we're going to have judicial reviews and try and prevent migrant hotels being in our Kent-controlled? When I say Kent-controlled, Reform-controlled councils, well, like Kent.
Like Kent,
I thought to myself, that's all well and good, but where are you going to get the money from to have these judicial reviews? And then when they fail, are you just going to be accused of a gimmick that costs money? Well, aha! Apparently, the party chairman, Zia Yusuf, has come out saying, no, we have a KC and a star chamber of brilliant barristers who are working day and night on this pro bono.
Right.
Now that changes everything. If reform is essentially picking up the tab because there isn't one, and they take these sort of, you know, the creation of new migrant housing, whether it be in the private sector or whether it be hotels, to the courts, at the very least it's going to destabilise and, you know, put a drag effect on that being able to go through. It's going to prevent, you know, you're going to have months and months of toiling in court. The optics, I think, would be brilliant, because at that point, even if they lose the case, Nigel gets to say, this is how broken our system is, that we have stood up, represented our constituents who have said no, and the government, the Labour government, have fought against that and prevented us from actually delivering.
It strengthens the narrative, is what you're saying, and actually the general public will go, yeah, do you know what, Labour, Tories, not worth it anymore, let's go elsewhere. I'd be really interested to know if listeners to Talk believe that Boris Johnson is the answer to the future of the Conservative Party, because I look at this from one perspective, right? You know, he's a gregarious personality, right? People know him by his first name. There aren't many politicians. Everyone knows who Boris is, right? You know, he's a bikes in this city, Boris Bikes, you know, he is a brand. I remember when he was standing again to be London Mayor, 2012, would it be 2012? Yeah, it would have been 2012, wouldn't it? London mayoral elections. I was working elsewhere. I was covering the story. I went to Hackney. I went to Hackney on the campaign trail, and he was going to Hackney. Now, you know Hackney, right? Hackney's hardly a Tory stronghold. Right? And yet he walked down the street, and there were people mobbing him. It was like Mick Jagger. It's the same with Farage, actually. Both of them have that political magic dust. And people were coming up to him and wanting selfies, and they were saying to him, I never vote for you, Boris, but I love you. Click.
Right.
So he's got something about him. So you can make the argument that he is a personality, a political personality that people know. Some people love him. He could be the answer regarding saving the Conservatives. And I'm using the term saving intentionally now, because if you look at some of the polling, they've dipped below 20%, which I think is danger territory for the Tories, right? You know, they could end up as the third party in British politics remarkably quickly. You know, you're looking at Lib Dem territory here. So I'm using that word saving. But I'd be fascinated to know if people think that Boris is the answer for the Conservative Party.
I mean, this is it. I don't think that he is basically on the left wing of the Conservative Party. Oh, he might be funny, he might have like mad hair and use Latin words, but he's basically a Liberal Democrat.
Do you think he is on the left wing, or do you think...
I don't think he's on the wing at all,
Well, this is what I was going to say. I wonder whether or not it's simply a case that he just goes with the flow with whatever he thinks is popular at the time. Because I don't know if he's got any hard and fast true beliefs or principles. I might be wrong. I mean, if you look back at his history when he was a journalist for the Daily Telegraph, he wrote all of his stories when he was in Brussels. He sniffed the wind, realised that people increasingly weren't happy regarding Brussels and EU membership, so he started writing these stories about, you know, funny-shaped bananas and regulations and stuff like that. Now, does he believe that, or did he believe that, or was it opportunistic? When it came to Brexit, we know famously he wrote 2 columns, didn't he?
Yeah, it's all about Boris, basically. But I think you just have to point to what happened when he was Prime Minister. Oh, yeah, poor thing, you know, it was COVID and it was this, that. But his instincts were, well, even if they were right on COVID, he didn't follow them. He forgot about liberty altogether. But on these other things, you just have to look at his obsession with net zero, his obsession with the Stonewall stuff, and the fact that he didn't do anything on immigration. If anything, it went up under him, because he actually increased the threshold of earnings. No, brought it down. Sorry, he lowered the threshold, which meant loads more people came into the country. And so his record speaks a particularly different story.
Well, they call it the Boris wave, don't they? That's what they call it, in terms of the amount of people that came to this country under his premiership. But I mean, I'm genuinely really interested to know, in terms of, away from polls here in the newspaper and whether or not there's some quite desperate Conservative MPs at the moment thinking, how can I save my job? Or maybe Boris is the answer. I would love to know if listeners and viewers this morning are thinking, yeah, do you know what? He is the future. He is the saviour of the Conservative Party, or is he a busted flush?
Well, there you go. Duncan's asked you a question. The onus is on you to answer it. 03444991000 is the number to call if you want to speak to Duncan directly and give us your thoughts. You can send me a WhatsApp on that number or leave me a voice note on that very topic, 87222, on the text like talk before your message. Now, interestingly, when he says, I think reform's going to sort of unravel in the next 3 years, I kind of think, how? Right? What is going to be the mechanics behind that? Because unless immigration can really be brought under control, unless the economy sometimes somehow has a massive resurgence, both things which are, just not going to happen, I can't see the support dimming. But what I do wonder about, is when you look at what's happened in America and when you look at what's happened on the continent and all of the stops they've pulled out to stop populist movements. The German intelligence agency has decided that the AfD have far-right connections, therefore they have to be banned from the ballot box. You have Rassemblement National. Oh, look, Marine Le Pen committed fraud in the EU. She's going to be banned from standing. In Romania, oh, look, his ties are too close to Russia. We're going to have to do the election again. What are they, and I don't know who the they is, but the globalist cartel who must exist because they seem to sort of, they include America and Trump and the lawfare. What have they got up their sleeves to try and take down Farage? Because they must be sitting there thinking, what can we do? I don't think any sort of scandal against him will necessarily work. Boris Johnson proves that himself.
I would agree.
They can't certainly make it seem like he's soft on immigration. He's too synonymous with that particular policy. And now these sort of hatchet jobs have been done so blatantly, so audaciously around the West. I think people will see it for what it is if they try and come after him with lawfare.
I think you're right. I mean, I think there's been a lot of column inches written recently about the local election results and the number of councillors, 677 councillors who came in, and have all of these councillors been vetted. I know there are journalists wading through social media accounts of reform councillors now trying to find stuff to go, well, look what they said 2 years ago, look what they said 10 years ago, this is a nasty person or whatever. So that is definitely going on. But again, you can make the same argument. There are Conservative councillors out there, Labour councillors, who have said some pretty unpalatable things.
There are people who have actually, full-blown criminals. Yeah. And
I don't think that sticks.
No, I don't think that sticks.
So I think we're seeing, and I'm not slow to the party, but I'm remarkably cynical. I like to have my own judgments and stuff. And a couple of months ago, I would have just sat gently down on the fence and just gone, I think we're going to remain with predominantly a two political party landscape in this country. But I've changed my mind now. I think reform, and some of the polls have busted through 30%. That gives you the opportunity under first past the post or electoral system, which is really hard for small parties. That starts giving you significant numbers.
That's one-party states territory almost.
It is, and I think things have changed. And I don't know what this unravelling would be. I don't know what the wheels coming off, the bus of reform look like, or the reform bandwagon, as the Mail call it. I don't know what it would be.
They're going to have to go to quite desperate measures, and I think the public will see through it. Now, what's interesting as well, conversely, is what happens to the Conservative Party in this time, because this is something else we're talking about while having our lipstick put on, which is whether there are going to be Tories who step down way in advance of the general election. Now, I asked wonderful Ted there to find something out for me, because I was saying to you, I have a feeling if you lose your seat, you get a lower settlement than if you step down beforehand. Yeah. And it is true.
Okay.
So the winding up payment, so if you sort of go, 2 years away from the election next year, well, my health's not so good, I'm going to step down now. The winding up payment, which averages £30,000, is higher than the loss of office payment, which averages around £5,000.
Okay.
And rarely exceeds £15,000. Right. So, rather than be a rat on a sinking ship and go down with the Titanic, if you get out in advance, you actually get a bigger payoff.
So what do you think then? We're going to see a handful or maybe more Conservative MPs thinking, I quite fancy that 30 grand, I'll step down in, where are we now, 2025, in 2027, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, or even, just not even facing the ignominy. I can't say that
I
word.
can't say it.
Ignominy. I can't say it.
Can we edit this bit out, please?
Ignominy. There's no way of doing it. It's gone. Rather than face the shame and embarrassment, the humiliation of losing your seat, having put all the effort into campaigning to know this, it's easier just to reverse out ahead of time and go, not my problem anymore. Yeah. And there must be a lot of Conservatives looking at this polling, thinking about their lives, thinking, I'm not doing anything anyway, I'm sitting on the back bench, wasting my time.
I think it depends on the kind of personality and the kind of politician you're talking about. All right, I'd be a hypocrite if I was to say we shouldn't be nasty about MPs, because I made quite a good living out of it in the past. And actually, I ran an MP's office for a year because I wanted to see what Westminster life was like. And I've encountered there are two different kinds of MPs. I have concluded there are those who want to do some good, they want to do public service, they genuinely want to make a difference for their constituents, and they do all of that. And I'll use these terms: tedious, boring, thankless tasks to make lives better for their constituents. All right, it's not easy. It's like being a social worker. Someone's got in some social housing, and the bathroom doesn't work. You've got to write numerous letters, but the MP's name makes stuff happen, which is good. So you get those kind of MPs who really want to make a difference. They want to contribute to public service, and then not really that bothered about climbing the greasy pole. And that gets me on to the next point, and it is one hell of a greasy pole. I have encountered dozens of MPs who have no interest in their constituents, and this is right across all political parties. Okay, so I'm not just branding a political party. They have no interest. All they want is a political career, and they want it as fast as possible, and they will do whatever they can to get to the top of that greasy pole, and they will shaft whoever they have to shaft to get there. And they're the worst kind of people, and more often than not, they're the people who shouldn't get to the top because they don't have the talent and the ability.
Or the conviction or ideology, and yet they do. Talking about whether someone has conviction or ideology, you asked our viewers and listeners whether they would want Boris Johnson to come back. Sharon in Staffordshire. It's ever since I've tried to say ignominy. I've lost it now. Sharon in Staffordshire says, bring back Boris would be the biggest mistake ever. He is worse than some. Alex, Boris could have, would have, should have, didn't. That's Paul G. Donoon. So clearly a lot of people in our audience don't seem to think he is going to be the silver bullet for the Conservative Party. Let's have a listen before we go to break. Voice notes from Nick in Loughborough.
The notion that Boris Johnson can save the Tories is for the birds. This is the man that lied through his teeth, introduced his cowardly lockdowns, and was a net zero fanatic. People won't forget that, and this country is in the mess it's in primarily because he locked it down for the best part of 2 years. Hope you have a nice weekend, lovely. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you, lovely. Right, well, there you go. So far, it seems to be unequivocal that Why am I giving myself the sort of hard multisyllabic words today? Use simple words. Use simple words. It seems to be...
Clear.
Clear, thank you. I'm not clear. It seems to be clear that nobody so far wants Boris back, but if you disagree, you know what to do. 03444 99 1000, phone or WhatsApp, or leave a voice note like Nick in Loughborough just did then. 8722 on the text, put talk before your message. We are going to go to break now, but on the subject of net zero, one of Boris Johnson's pet projects, Britain could be facing months of blackouts. That is the warning today. We're going to be discussing that after this.
this is not a trade deal. It is an alleviation of some of the tariffs, especially on steel and cars.
Yeah.
So steel and cars are back down to 10%, and steel and aluminium's on 0.
Right.
Everything else is still paying those extra tariffs.
And also,
so
this
isn't a deal.
Much
it's
to be
partial
discussed,
relief.
isn't it? Like the pharmaceutical stuff is still to be discussed.
Yeah.
Lots of other things still to be discussed.
Yeah, and we're worse off because we're having to take... So there's a manufactured crisis here by Trump. Long-term tactics aside, this is a manufactured crisis for which we've got a partial exemption, and we've given the Americans some stuff in return.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Here you go, ladies and gentlemen. Public shame or disgrace. The word is...
ignominy.
There you are.
Well done.
Ignominy.
Yeah, that isn't me. That's I haven't become Stephen Hawking. But it's a hard word to say. Ignominy. Ignominy.
Ignominy.
I shouldn't have such an expansive vocabulary when I can't pronounce the words. We were talking about Boris Johnson's obsession with net zero. He loved it. Hosting that COP up in, was it Scotland, St Ives? I can't remember. And of course, Sir Alok Sharma was the sort of net zero minister. He made a cabinet position for all of this, then sort of knighted him, whacked him in the Lords. Boris loves that stuff. And this is what voters need to be reminded of before the great Boris comeback. That was the sort of upwards inflection.
Sorry, I was just reading about net zero in the Sunday Telegraph. No, you're absolutely right. They do need to be aware that he was leading on net zero, and this has been this baton has been passed in many ways, not by or not to Keir Starmer, but to Mad Ed. Miliband.
Ed Zero, as I've started to call him.
Increasingly, I'm sorry, Ed, if you're listening, chances are you're not, but increasingly looks unhinged when you see him on the telly doing interviews. He can't bear to be challenged when people start talking about energy security and whether or not we're able to store enough stuff from solar panels or indeed wind turbines. He gets quite affronted and offended when people ask him these questions.
He's balmy. It doesn't help that he sort of goes and plays ukuleles in wind farm fields and stuff like that and has still not solved his sinuses.
And you know, one of the worst things about Ed Miliband, I'm trying to make up here for not paying attention earlier, Alex, so forgive me.
That's all right.
One of the worst things about it, and you know, he's a guy who's preaching net zero, you know, almost from the mountain, right? He's preaching net zero, and he's a guy who is virtually every week hopping on a plane, doing thousands of miles around the world. Yeah. And I think most people, myself included, just find it massively hypocritical that we're being told that we must reduce emissions, we must do X, Y, and Z, bore, yawn, and yet the guy who's leading the charge is doing the complete opposite. There's
also a very interesting follow the money when you look at some of the companies who are set to benefit from these policies and the boards that his brother might sit on. Now, we've had a report out today, this doesn't surprise me at all, that Mad Ed's net zero push risks leaving Britain increasingly vulnerable to a Spanish-style blackout. This is according to official reports. The grid operator, indeed, has raised concerns that the switch from dependable gas to intermittent wind and solar would reduce network stability. And that funding measures to prevent the system crashing were set to increase significantly to £1 billion a year. Now, what happened in Spain is, was it cyber hack? Was it this? No, let's not talk about what it actually was, because what it was is the fact that when you have energy, that when the sun's out, it's a massive boost, you know, radiating down on those solar fields. You get this huge surge in the system. When it goes behind a cloud, it quietens down. And the way that the grid works, I'm going to say this in a pedestrian way, and I'm sure our next guest will be able to explain it better, is it seems to have a regular ticking over like an engine, that you can't go roo and then stop, because that makes it go funny, and then it all, you know, goes bonkers and it turns off. A bit like, I suppose, you know, your sort of own electricity system in your home, that if you had the washing machine, the tumble dryer and everything running at once, sometimes your fuse box goes, whoa.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy, or presumably you need a certain amount of fuel, like a petrol engine, to keep going into into it, so it
Right.
ticks over to drive the wheels.
Yeah.
And if that flow of energy is not there, then it stops working. Is that similar?
Well, let's find out. Let's see if Harry Wilkinson knows. He may not, but he is head of policy of the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Hello there, Harry. Is that pretty... I mean, I don't know if you know about the technicalities of the ticking over of the national grid and these sort of surges, the lack of reliability that comes with renewables and how that does affect things and may or may not lead to blackouts.
Well, good morning. Well, net zero is economic suicide, and this is only becoming clearer every day. And this is all to do with something called inertia, which is what you've been explaining, which is the frequency that needs to be kept the same across the whole grid to keep everything working. So one good analogy that I heard was like a spinning top, a large generating turbine that you might find in a gas power station or a nuclear power station. These are like large spinning tops, and actually it would take some force to knock it over and trip the system. Whereas if, wind turbines and renewable generators like solar, those are like little spinning tops, and if you knock them over, they're going to cascade and they're going to knock out lots of other generating facilities with them because they're too small. They don't have that impetus. Inertia is like impetus to get all that electricity round to all the nooks and crannies of the grid. When you have these small generators, it doesn't have that impetus to keep all of the rest of the grid in motion. So I think you explained that well. And what we saw in Spain, was there was a lack of inertia on the system. It was being incredibly reliant on solar during this period, and then it lost that, and that affected the whole of the Iberian Peninsula. Now, because of increasing interconnection that we see across Europe, these blackouts really do have the potential to spread really quite widely across Europe, and the economic consequences of that would be absolutely devastating.
And I mean, I also think the social consequences would be devastating because you just know in Spain somehow it's nice sunshine, so they all open their bottles of San Miguel and sat outside going, "Isn't it funny we don't have power?" In Britain, every single footlocker around the country would have his windows kicked in by yobbos the minute that there's no electricity. But the other mad thing is this. Britain's contribution to net zero, and you might be able to tell me what it is, it's about 1% is often the figure mooted. Well, quite frankly, that's probably cancelled out by the giant charity cheque we send to Beijing for all of the windwams and panels anyway, and they're using slave labour and coal in order to generate this stuff that's, being papered all over what should be arable land and farmers' fields. But when you've got other countries, the big economies like America going, we're just not playing anymore, there's... even if we wanted to save the world, we just can't, can we?
No, I mean, this is absolute madness. I mean, I would just point out, people did die in those Spanish blackouts. And unfortunately, if we have blackouts here, we would see deaths potentially as well. So the recklessness and the irresponsibility is out of this world. I think Alok Sharma should be reconsidering his reaction. We saw him, gleefully celebrating blowing up coal power stations that were providing that inertia that the grid needed. They were also providing cheap industrial electricity that was supporting our industries, which are now going to the wall. Hopefully he has some regrets about that. Britain, of course, is less than 1% of global emissions now. What we're doing has no impact whatsoever on the global system. This is all to do with cheap energy. And if we actually wanted an energy transition to be meaningful, you would have to develop technologies that would be cheaper on their own terms, that people would adopt, not being forced to do that by the government, but because they were the better option. This is a basic misunderstanding of economics. Picking winners has been a failure in all sorts of different areas of the economy in the past.
Harry, you're right. It is a misunderstanding of basic economics. Yet what we've seen with the previous Conservative government and what we're seeing with Keir Starmer's government is still this pursuit of net zero. So politically, why do you think they're pursuing this still?
Well, I think, the left in particular has embraced the green movements. They like the idea that it challenges economic growth. They have this degrowth ideology in certain parts of the left, where they believe that it's having too big an impact on the planet. But what we actually see in practice is that as we become more efficient, we actually start using less of many resources. So this whole idea that increasing economic growth will lead to environmental catastrophe is a complete mistake. The most damaging in terms of the environment economic systems in the past have been communist systems, where because there is no price mechanism, you see the massive overproduction of all sorts of resources. Those have been the most environmentally damaging systems that we've seen in the past.
We also know how the communists in Ukraine managed to run their nuclear power stations, didn't we? Which wasn't exactly showering themselves in glory. Harry, thank you ever so much. I mean, we all know it's a disaster. At the very least, it's a ridiculous straitjacket and self-flagellation at the altar of, we are going to shower ourselves in faux moral rectitude at the expense of the country's manufacturing, the country's prosperity, of people being able to turn on their heating. It's suicidal. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I think this is the next thing that is going to be overturned by public opinion in this country. You and I were talking earlier about how there was a climate in the past, and it still exists in many places, where you couldn't express concerns about immigration, or you couldn't really say you weren't happy about EU membership without people shouting you down, right? There are parallels here, because there is this mindset, this culture has been created, which is you really shouldn't criticise net zero. Do you not care about the planet? All of this. And now people are starting to turn, I think, because they've seen how it impacts on their daily lives. Their bills aren't going down, which is what the Labour government promised in their manifesto. They're going the other direction. They're going up. Net zero potentially is damaging people's livelihoods. It is damaging their finances. It is damaging our economy when it comes to growth. I mean, we've got this, what are they called? GB Energy, what are they called?
Oh yeah, with that some German man who's paid a load of money to do nothing.
You've got GB Energy, which doesn't make any energy.
It's crazy.
It's just bizarre.
He's supposed to be putting solar panels on hospitals, and then he's been told you can't get the solar panels from China because of, I don't know, the forced labour.
Exactly. So you've got all of this kind of like, oh, net zero is good, we're doing X, Y, and Z. And I think people, the public, the people that matter, the taxpayers now are slowly just turning against that, just going, oh, I don't believe any of this.
Well, this is it. Farage thinks that it's going to be the next big sort of, Brexit debate. And that man reads political tea leaves brilliantly, and he doesn't pick a fight unless he thinks he can win it. And that is where I think Boris Johnson's weakness is, because you can just point at his record and go, he loved all that stuff. Let's listen to a voice note from Mark in Lancashire on the subject of Boris.
Morning, Alex. It's Mark in Lancashire. Whoa, on the subject of a Boris comeback. A big lol at that. It's not going to happen. And as far as real Conservatives and Reform voters are concerned, we know that if we vote Boris, we're going to get Stanley Johnson on net zero and we're going to get Carrie on all this woke gender stuff and more mass immigration. Vote Boris, get Stanley and Carrie. That's what it boils down to.
Wow. I think he's probably right, to be honest. Thank you, Mark in Lancashire. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be speaking to Big Phil. That's right, Philip Ingram, MB, former senior military intelligence officer, about all of the scary things happening in far-flung corners of the world.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. If you find Britain depressing, which I think most of us do, don't worry, we're probably not as depressing as the countries we're going to be talking about next. Let's call it Schadenfreude. I'm joined now by Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. Good morning to you, Philip.
Good morning, Alex.
OK, so let's talk about the latest going on in Ukraine, because Putin has now said he wants direct talks. He'll actually sit down, break bread with Zelensky in order to build a lasting, strong peace. That's come in a rare late-night TV address from the Kremlin, hours apparently after Keir Starmer threatened Russia with sanctions. I always wonder when it's like, we're going to put sanctions against you, where they keep finding more sanctions that they could have used initially down the back of the sofa. Anyway, I doubt anything that Keir Starmer said had any part to play in Putin's decision. But what's he playing at here? What's Putin up to?
Putin was forced into a position where he had to respond. We got yesterday some European leaders, Keir Starmer, Francois Macron, new German Chancellor, the Polish Prime Minister, all going to Ukraine. And then we had a phone call with the leaders of the Coalition of the Willing. And then they dialed in Donald Trump after they'd said, let's agree a ceasefire from Monday. And force Putin's hand. And Donald Trump supported the Coalition of the Willing. And effectively, it's forced Putin to respond. So Putin has responded in typical fashion. He turned up, I think, almost 2 hours late for his own press conference that he'd called, and then said, we're not going to agree with the proposals that have come out from this group of people we don't recognise, but we will sit down and have talks on the 22nd of May in Turkey, and has thrown that out there to try and deflect things. So it's a typical Putin response to try and buy time for him to work out what to do next, because he was ambushed.
Well, good. Finally, it seems to me that the European leaders are getting together and doing something effective. We've been waiting for that for a good number of years, quite frankly. Now, something else we've been waiting for that people are saying is going to be a damp squib is a review of the nation's defences. This defence review that's due to be published, Strategic Defence Review, could come out as soon as next week, being led by Lord Robertson of Port Ellen, who's a former Defence Secretary, and NATO Secretary General, and Sir Richard Barrons, a retired general. People believe it's going to be published without any detail, without any meat on the bone, because they just haven't been consulting the current senior military chiefs.
They haven't been doing an awful lot, and actually, in their defence, the government hasn't been giving them very clear direction. If you're going to go and have a defence review, the starting point has to be the government telling those that are doing the review what it is that they want to do around the world. How many different operations, at what sort of scale, in what sort of time frame, and that gives you a foundation to start to build on. That, I understand, hasn't happened. And then we get the debacles like was exposed by Ted, the producer, in some work that he did into the MOD press office, because I had said on air that the Defence Review team had come and said they needed more than 3% of GDP. Ted decided to check this with the Minister of Defence. The Minister of Defence said, no. They've been told the answer is 2.5% of GDP. We're not considering anything above that. And then less than a week later, Keir Starmer comes out and says, 2.5 and then a path to 3% and looking at more. So they don't know what they're doing because they haven't been told. And therefore, anything that they're going to come out with has been cobbled together at the last minute, trying to put something that they can do this political tick in the box. Yes, we've done a defence review, whilst they then spend the rest of the summer trying to work out some more detail to give us in the autumn. But it's a farce, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious, isn't it? We live in an increasingly unstable world. Our troop numbers have been absolutely, cut back since, say, even the Falklands era. We've got dodgy old equipment. We're giving a load of money to Ukraine, yes, potentially for the right reasons, but where's our own sort of resources being built up? And it's quite clear we live in a world with this sort of, this multipolar world with these two axes, where you've got the, European leaders meeting Kiev to talk about, right, we've got to push back against Russia. A couple of days after Russia's sort of hanging out with the who's who of scumbags, basically, at their Victory Day celebrations. And now, on top of all of this, you've got things going on in India and Pakistan. There was a ceasefire that apparently Donald Trump said, I've been on the phone to both of them. They've both agreed that they're going to down weapons. It's a huge success, rather catching China napping, I would say. But then within moments of essentially announcing that, there were explosions in Srinagar, missiles being seen over Jammu, which must have come, one assumes, from the Pakistani part of Kashmir. Where are we going with this particular conflagration? Because those two are mortal enemies. They despise each other, and my impression is both governments are playing to their base. Pakistan essentially in the doldrums economically, is not a popular government because everyone's Imran Khan and they've thrown him in clink. Meanwhile, Modi knows that if there's one thing that's going to sort of rally the base, it's going on the warpath against Pakistan and cancelling cricket as well.
Well, very much so. And it all's happening in Kashmir, which they've been fighting over for ages. And throw in the third party to the mix, which is a Kashmiri separatist organisation that's fighting both sides. And, you can understand what's going on. I think the reason why there was an exchange of fire after Donald Trump put his statement out about there being an agreed ceasefire by both sides was that it took a while for the pack mule to take the memo up to the front line and stop the troops from pushing their buttons. The thing that I'm finding really interesting about this conflict is the Pakistani use of Chinese military equipment. And this is the first time that we've seen Chinese military equipment tested to this degree in a combat environment. That's a worrying trend to watch. And it seems as if it has had, if we believe the Pakistani reports, an awful lot more success than the Indian military equipment, which tends to be old Russian and old American and old Western stuff, all cobbled together with a little bit of new stuff that didn't quite survive, but they weren't experienced enough to operate it.
This is essentially the air war, isn't it? It's all about those Chinese jets, which have never been sort of put out in the theatre of war. And I think they took down a Rafale, wasn't it? Which is sort of Dassault, an old sort of French bit of hardware. One of my favourite military aircrafts, if I'm honest. It's quite a sexy little beast. But what's interesting, actually, in terms of the proxy war, is you're right. You've got on one side, you've got China selling all their weapons to Pakistan, and Russia selling a lot of stuff to India, and then in another breath, those two are hanging out at the sort of victory parade in Moscow, having sort of joint forces saying, look, if we get together, the world's in peril.
Yeah, well, yes, and this is where the Victory in Europe Day parade in Moscow was very interesting. You got all of those despot leaders coming together. The Xi Jinping, leader of China, and Vladimir Putin was probably the most important that was there. But again, Putin was putting on a big display. This is the first time in a number of years that we've seen as many armoured vehicles on display, and then aircraft flown. I'm surprised the Russians still have so many aircraft and so many armoured vehicles around. But it's, the world order is changing. Putin is on the back foot at the moment. We should be under no illusion about that. And it wouldn't surprise me if he had his fingers in the pie and was helping to stir India and Pakistan, because if he can get anything to take the world's eyes away from what's going on inside Ukraine, he will try that. And this is something that we have to be careful of. Middle East next.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're right, actually. And just looking at Sudan and how that's a proxy war with various entities stirring things up and selling weaponry. We live in dangerous times, that's for sure. Philip Ingram, thank you ever so much. I'll get your thoughts on this very quickly before we go to break. I don't know where you were at on your geopolitics, but one thing that is clear to me, you've got the Crinklies, as they're called, which is basically the BRICS group of nations enhanced, which is China, Russia, India, North Korea. Well, no more like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and India sort of plays both sides. I never understand how Iran fits into all of this, because Russia has its own issue with Islamism.
It does,
and then Iran's there, sort of stirring the pot.
It's about being the disruptor, isn't it? I think, and I think Russia is. I had this conversation, funnily enough, with someone yesterday about organisations that maybe receive Russian money around the world in order just to destabilise the West. I won't name organisations because that would be inappropriate, but I think there's something behind that, and I think, you're right. I think Russia has issues with Islamist terrorism. However, they can afford to be supportive, maybe under the radar a bit and not so under the radar with Iran, because Iran is a disruptor and it unsettles things, doesn't it?
That's the schism, I think, that we need to make happen, sort of break up the cosy relationship between Russia and Iran, make them realise that they actually hate each other, and use our allies in the Middle East, of which we've got plenty, Qatar, Oman, you know, in the grand scheme of things, sensible countries who help us out and thankfully sell us gas. Thank you for keeping our lights on. And really try and break that relationship up. Right, we're going to take a break now. When we come back after the break, Duncan and I will be chewing over lots of news and also hopefully hearing from you. It's your opportunity to hear your dulcet tones projected out on the airwaves. 0344499 is the 1000. Forgot that bit at the end. 0344499 1000 is the number to call, standard network rate, or send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note, 87222 on the text. If you're going to smuzz, you need to write the word talk before your message. We're back after this.
This is not a trade deal, it is an alleviation of some of the tariffs, especially on steel and cars. So steel and cars are back down to 10%, and steel and aluminium's on 0%. Everything else is still paying those extra tariffs.
And also,
so this isn't a deal.
Much to be discussed, isn't it? Like the pharmaceutical stuff is still to be discussed. Lots of other things still to be discussed.
And we're worse off because we're having to take... So there's a manufactured crisis here by Trump. Long-term tactics aside, this is a manufactured crisis for which we've got a partial resumption, and we've given the Americans some stuff in return.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. The conversations we have during advert break that you suddenly have to can the minute that Tech Op says in your ear. We're coming back in 3, 2. Right, here's your chance to learn how you can win Champions League final tickets plus 5 big ones to spend in München.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive $5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Or as they say in Bavaria, viel Glück. Yeah, that means good luck. Now, you've got some... You've been digging around on X, haven't you?
Yeah, people have been contacting us at talkTV on X, formerly known as Twitter. This is Rafa Eli, I think I've got it right, saying, "Morning both. As someone said, I think, recently on the Jeremy Kyle show, Boris Johnson destroyed the car industry and our freedom to choose what we buy with his petrol car ban, all to make his wife happy. A whole country in poverty and blackouts to stop her indoors nagging." And this is developing as a theme, because also we've been contacted on X by Mr. Watchman, who says, "As an ex-paid-up Tory, there's no way that I want Johnson back. He's a liability. His liberal globalist tendencies are far too left-wing. He's desperately needy and supports most of the policies which have ruined the Tory right wing. Carrie Antoinette rules him." So there's a theme developing here. The most our correspondents on X are just going, yeah, he just does what his wife says.
Yeah, I know. That was sort of put out by Dominic Cummings, really, wasn't it? Princess Nut was the sort of phrase that he came up with, which I know, Carrie, and I always find it rather distasteful to go after the woman, the wife, and all the rest of it. They don't sort of go after what's her face Starmer, although she's only sort of wheeled out at conference time.
Rarely see her these days.
Rarely see her. I wonder if he does as well, frankly. You know, I always find it to be kind of a little bit... I don't know, unsavoury. But you blame the man himself, OK? Blame the man himself. He loved that net zero stuff. He loved all the Stonewall stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't, you know.
I'll tell you what's interesting about Boris. Do you remember he went on this crusade about telling all of us to lose weight? And as a middle-aged man who's quite chunky myself, I always think, maybe I need to shed the timber. And I'm doing my best to shed the timber, but beer and cheese get in the way, right?
I know.
I saw him on the telly a couple of days ago. He's like ballooned in size.
Has he?
Yeah, he needs to start practicing what he preaches.
Oh, well, that ventilator might be waiting for him. That's dark, isn't it?
Very dark.
No, but I mean, you know, he should take a leaf out of Jenrick's book. Jenrick is sort of, you know, if anyone's had a glow up, it's that man. It's quite incredible. I mean, my fallibility is less the beer, although Belgian beer is awesome.
Yeah.
I can get stuck into it. You know, when you're in Belgium, you have the plate of cheese with the celery salt and the mustard. And when I went to Brussels recently with my other half, and they just come out with, you know, sort of unwashed hand, chopping up a bit of cheese, bring out the plate with the cocktail sticks. And you sit there and eating, and because it's in little cubes, you're like, yeah, this is a nice normal snack. And you imagine if you stuck all the cubes back together, it's basically like chowing down, you know, 500 grams. But no, you know what my real weakness is, which is, of course, God's own juice.
You love your cider,
the cider.
I got a lovely story here in the Sunday Express. Cheers to a busy, buzzy year for bees. I had to practice that. So what they're saying is that it's been a busy year with bees and consequently a bumper year for cider and perry, because there's going to be a lot more apples and pears knocking around this autumn, which means if you're a cider drinker, there's going to be a lot more cider available. What's your... I'm not a big cider fan. I had a bad experience with Diamond White when I was 14.
That's not cider.
Hang on a roundabout.
On a roundabout?
It was a very long night. So if I wanted to get back into cider, proper cider, what would be my gateway?
Oh, your gateway drug. So this is what I would recommend. Basically, you have to go to the West Country. There's two types of cider. Well, okay, no. First of all, what is cider? If you're looking at all those things on the pump in a pub, it's not, because to be called cider in the UK, you have to have a minimum 30% apple juice. And all this stuff is basically a little bit of apple juice, flavouring, sugars, added bubbles. It's an alco pop. It's a bit like, you know, putting grape juice with a load of synthetic materials and calling it wine.
Understood.
Ridiculous. Yep. So first of all, your cider has to be 100% apple juice, no back carbonating, no back sweetening, no funny flavours like all those girly drinks.
Oh, so it's not fizzy then? Well,
it can, so here's another factoid. Did you know that cider, which is the sort of national drink of the UK, it was cider makers who invented the carbonation process by leaving cider, which continues to, because of the amount of wild yeast on apple skins, it will continue to ferment over and over and over. And so it does eventually go fizzy naturally. And when the Normans invaded, saw what we were doing with that, went, oh, we can do that ourselves because we've also got apples in Normandy, took the recipe back, and then people making wine said, that's a good idea, and thus was born champagne. It originated in cider. You've got two types of cider. You've got your Eastern cider from Kentish apples. That's all the sort of apples you eat, your Discoveries, your Bramleys. Western cider, the varietals have funny names like sheep's nose, brown boy,
I like the sound of that.
Your gnarly stuff. You couldn't eat those apples off the tree; they'd taste disgusting. But they make amazing tangy cider. So I'm a West Country cider girl. And it's got 100% apple juice. You can get single varietals or mixes. But the only way to access this stuff, the only way, is to go to a press in the West Country.
Right.
No pub in London sells it.
No.
You get some of the fancier sort of craft ciders, but the only way to get that good stuff, and believe you me, you can drink glass after glass after glass, and it's a bit like having some sort of wacky drug. You don't get sort of miserable mopey. You get energised and rainbows.
So I need to find
a
boozer in Shepton Mallet or something.
Shepton Mallet is the way forward.
Right.
The best cider, I think, is Roger Wilkins. And I shouldn't really say other varieties are available, but he is a god in the cider world.
I might reset my sat nav when I leave here.
Just if you phone up Roger, he'll pick up and be like, all right, and he'll post it to you.
Shall I mention your name?
Do, yeah, and I'll hopefully get some for free. Goodbye to Duncan Barks. We're going to miss him, but hello to you again. After this break, I'll see you in a mo.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. The best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips in Leeds, it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us curry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10p, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12 and 60p. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks ago.
How much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Keeping it real.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Wasn't Duncan Barks sensational? I love that man. He's absolutely brilliant. Spending 2 hours with him in a studio is just like not working. It's like, you know, waking up at the crack of dawn to go down the pub early and have a good old chinwag. But I must admit, I have invited some pretty stern consternation from a very good West Country friend of mine, because Duncan Barks and I ended our little time together discussing cider. And the first thing that my Gloucester Baba James Price said when we came to the studio, look at this face, he's not happy. Look at him.
Betrayal.
Betrayal. He said, you talking about cider with someone else.
Hopefully you were thinking about me the whole time, right?
Always, especially when your shirt's that far open. That's an image I'm not going to be able to get out of my head. Like James Bond, like Sean Connery level of man.
Give the people what they want.
Whatever you call it. Yeah, give people what they want. And the gorgeous Mike Buckley is also with me. You a cider drinker, Mike?
No, I'm not, no.
Shame, you're missing out.
I am missing out. I've drunk a lot of cider in my youth and I haven't really revisited.
Where are you from?
The curse of white lightning.
In the world. Where are you from?
Sheffield.
Oh, yeah, it's not really a cidery
It's not really
place,
a cidery kind of place, no.
Yeah, it's sort of the white lightning on the park bench type affair, not sort of, you know, the mad spinny broom stuff that us weird sort of Neolithic pagans in the West Country enjoy. Anyway, we are now going to have our head-to-head and go through all the front pages in the news with representing the camp on the right is Mr. James Price and former former Conservative advisor, and former Labour advisor Mike Buckley is going to be pitching in for the left of politics as we trundle through all the stuff that's knocking about today in the Sunday papers. And there's a lot of good stuff to talk about, actually. Let's start off with the front page of the Telegraph, which is yet another story that it just... Why? A retired police officer, he was a special constable, which I think means it's sort of voluntary and part-time, doesn't it? Special constable, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, he served in the Kent Police Force for a good number of years. He had a knock at the door because he had got exercised over the pro-Palestine protests, and then equally exercised about an incident that happened at an airport in Russia where Israeli travellers were sort of pulled aside and stopped, and commented on someone at a pro-Palestine protest saying, "I'm not anti-Semitic, how dare you do that," saying, yeah, next will be rounding up the Jews at Heathrow Airport, or something to that effect. But someone's clearly read this and thought he was being literal and suggesting that's a good idea, which he wasn't. He was actually taking the opposite point of that would be a terrible thing to happen. But did that really require 6 police officers with pepper spray, you know, all the sort of tools of the trade that they carry about with them, rifling through his house, taking all his electronic goods, taking him back to the cop shop, whacking him in a police cell for 8 hours, going through, you know, literature all about a horrific tragic incident that happened to his daughter in a car accident in Ibiza, commenting on his bookshelf and saying it looks very Brexity. I mean, Mike, this is really quite disturbing, isn't it?
I mean, we don't know the police backstory at all, so we don't know what they knew about this gentleman before. We don't know what they'd been told by the person who alerted them to this tweet. It does, from reading the article, sound like they responded in an overly, strong manner. But obviously, they were just concerned that either he was inciting a hate crime or was seeking to commit a hate crime. So it's right that they checked that out, but they possibly did go a little bit far in checking that out.
How do you think they should have checked it out at all? Because I'm afraid when it comes to what Mike said, I'm more of the camp that unless it's very clear that this person is saying, right, go and do X, Y and Z, people can say what they like.
I'm actually very glad of the opportunity to be able to hand myself in, because I too have got copies of The Spectator at home, which he was had a black mark against him. Some Douglas Murray books he had, I've got some of those as well. And I think this gentleman's wife was a hairdresser, and so they found a shopping list with some bleach and some tin foil on it as well. And I've got both of those things at home in my kitchen and my loo as well. So perhaps Kent Police want to come and investigate me as well. See, it just sounds completely absurd that someone has a Twitter account and gets exercised about a bunch of terrorist sympathisers going on marches and celebrating the deaths and abduction of Jewish people at the Nova Festival and elsewhere in Israel, and going and chanting how great that is outside the Israeli embassy. I get pretty annoyed about that as well. And the fact that this guy had a perhaps slightly inelegantly worded tweet, God knows I've done some of those as well, does not warrant 6 police officers come marching through, rifling through all this stuff and throwing him in the cells. It's crazy.
And then if the police were very concerned about people inciting direct violence, particularly against Jewish people, they'd be kept very busy by all the people around the country who've been saying globalise the intifada, wouldn't they?
So I'm sure they have been kept busy, and sadly there has been a rise in hate crime against Jewish people and against Arab people as well since October the 7th, 2023. And I'm glad that our police force is responding to that, because the last thing that we want in our country is for people to feel unsafe or to be attacked because of their ethnicity or their religion. So I'm actually glad that the police is stepping up. Whether this was the right response, I don't know, because I don't know the detail of it. It does look from the newspaper article like it was a bit strong. But again, we don't know what else the police knew about this gentleman.
Well, let's also think about some of the way the police have been handling some of those marches. They've tried everything they can not to go make a big scene during these marches, and so they lift people after the fact. They do some facial recognition stuff and all the rest of it, and then go along and say, actually, you probably can't say gas the Jews, miss the person who's been on this parade or whatever, because they don't want to cause a ruckus. I kind of think they should cause a bit of a ruckus in this. People should be seen that it's not acceptable to go around screaming your support for a terrorist organisation that's banned in this country. And, the police have in some cases bent over backwards to try to say, actually, do you know what? Jihad has lots of different meanings, right? Sometimes it can just mean a deep, difficult internal mental struggle. And yet when some retired bloke who'd been a police officer wants to tweet something, they come down like the clappers on him. That is 2-tier then it's wrong.
Let's go back to what you were saying, Mike, about at least the police are stepping up and people are inciting hatred and might be inciting violence. It's worth investigating, and perhaps this was just overly done. I think we can all say it's overly done. You could have just said, did you mean that? No, bye then, mate. Oh, yeah, you used to be one of us. Yeah, shake hands, sorry to disturb your weekend. I mean, that probably would have sufficed. But we were talking earlier on the programme, Duncan Barks and I, about Lucy Connolly, what we know about Lucy Connolly, her backstory is quite tragic in terms of losing a child, getting very upset about what happened in Southport, writing something on X which sounded pretty bad. Yeah, but I don't think there was any causal connection between what she wrote on X and actually instructing thugs to go and commit crimes. That was never even tested in a court of law. She was told by the CPS, plead guilty and you'll get a softer sentence. 32 months in prison for something she wrote in a moment of upset and anger. Otherwise, a woman who looks after other people's kids, who's married to a local councillor, who's got no history of even points on her licence, is in prison, not even allowed visitation rights. Now, we did a lot more to protect Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe in Iran, who they accused of stirring up trouble, than we have this woman who, as far as I'm concerned, was put in prison to serve as an example, to stop other people being loose-lipped on X. And therefore, to me, she's a political prisoner. I mean, does that worry you, what happened to that woman?
I mean, I can't remember exactly what she said, but I think it was fairly horrific.
She said, burn down the hotels, see if I care if you burn down the hotels.
I mean, that's horrific.
It's horrific, but she deleted it 2 months. 2 months after.
I mean, that's asking...
2 months, 2 hours.
That's asking people to go and burn down a hotel in which innocent people are living.
It's not asking people, though, is it? She wasn't there on signal groups instructing Yobs to do that.
That is a horrific thing to say, and it's good that we have laws in our country against that.
32 months in prison, no visitation rights.
I mean, I'm not here to, comment on the sentencing and
You're
why
not here to comment on it. That's the problem, because I'm asking you.
Well, that's a fair.
So she said,
comment from you.
She said mass deportation now. Set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bees for all I care. If that makes me racist, so be it.
I mean, that is horrible.
It's horrible.
I mean, that is horrific.
But so is globalise the intifada, frankly.
Well, we have laws in our country against people saying things like that, and it's good that we have laws in our country against saying that. I don't know why they made the sentence as stringent as they did. They may have done that because after the riots in summer 2023, you're right. I mean, the police, the government, the justice system, they acted very quickly to arrest a lot of these people, and they did give a lot of them, particularly the rioters as well, some like quite hefty sentences. Because what they wanted to say to people is this is unacceptable.
So you agree,
and it says that.
So you agree that she was being used to set an example, and some woman who's got no criminal record just wrote something that might be ugly but isn't. I think if this had been,
it's more than ugly.
It's more than ugly. But if this had been taken to actually had a case and she wasn't encouraged to plead guilty, you would have had to find a causal relationship between that particular post.
Well, I don't know that you would, because it's a hate crime nonetheless. I don't know why the sentence is as long as it is. The judge isn't here. We can't ask him or her, so we don't know that. I don't know if this is a normal sentence, if it's overly long.
There's a 32-year-old mother who's got a sick husband who can't even see her kids. The impact that's going to have on her mental well-being, her family, when she was a law-abiding citizen, bar one particular tweet. 32 months in prison.
What she's going to learn is don't do that.
Oh no, come on, that's a really horrible way to take
this. What the rest of us are going to learn is don't do that. And we have laws in our country and we have sentences because obviously we need to punish the person who's done something bad, in this case, and horrible,
So would you give anyone saying globalise the intifada a 32-month sentence?
But it also says to everybody else in the country, this is not acceptable behaviour in the UK, and I'm glad it's not acceptable behaviour in the UK.
No, I think that, first of all, we should never necessarily equate legality with morality. There are plenty of immoral laws that I think exist. There's certainly in the past been lots of laws that have been immoral. So let's just not equate that. The idea that there are lots of very stringent speech laws in this country that they don't have in other countries. They don't have this in the same way in the United States, for example, and that's not a country that has completely fallen apart because of free speech. In fact, it's probably been enhanced because of it. We all know why the judge handed out this sentence. We all know why this happened. It was, again, to encourage other people, because I think you'll find now, with the small size of the army that we've got, with the small size of the police force, with the way that things have been politicised, if there were to be those riots on a much larger scale, we would see really serious civil conflict all up and down the country, and we could see control being lost. And we saw a bit of that happening after those Southport riots. There were counter-rioting happening in places like Birmingham, where there were Muslim militias basically going around, and Jess Phillips, the Home Office Minister, defending them, saying, oh, well, they thought there were going to be some far-right people coming out on the streets, and justifying militia-like behaviour. And I think that the authorities know they don't have the manpower to stop that if this kicks off. And as a result, you've got this young mum who's been the victim of it all.
I find it astonishing that the left wing, who beatified Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, you know, hand-wrung over her and the awful thing that happened to her, are not exercised by this.
I've got no idea why you're equating the two.
Because they're two people that the particular government have used as an example by putting in prison who've got children and a husband.
Zaghari didn't do anything wrong. She was arrested by the Iranian regime and she was imprisoned for a very long time, for years. She didn't do anything wrong. This woman, Lisa Connolly, she did something horrific. She incited violence against a large number of people, I mean, probably thousands of people in asylum hotels across the country, at a time of very heightened tension on this issue. It was horrific. If a hotel had been burned down, I'm sure that you will be finding that horrific as well. I find that tweet horrific. I'm very glad she's in prison. I don't know if she's there for too long. That's none of my business. That's up to the judge. That's up to the judge.
I think it's dreadful that woman's in prison. I think it's utterly atrocious.
I don't know if that's a normal sentence.
If you said something on this in the height of this debate, this is called head-to-head, and it goes too far in the heat of the moment, you would want there to be some level of, oh, actually, he didn't really mean that. You could be rowed back. And the reason that you and I do these things is a level of, let's just call it eloquence, that some people with Twitter accounts, when they see this stuff and get really angry, don't have. I've said stuff that I'm, you know, in the heat of the moment that I'm very angry about. You see the Axel Ruda Cabana story on Friday night. I was very tempted to say some very punchy things, and you hold yourself back. Some people don't do that. As you say, this woman has a history of loss in her family as well, and emotions run high. Yeah, she did what she did was wrong, but the disproportionate
the fact there was no court case to me is what is scary about this.
The disproportionate level of punishment to encourage other people, I think, is a moral outrage, and I think we should all be annoyed by that, and therefore we are all invested in the fact that she's been put in prison for too long as a political prisoner.
I think it's
There must have been some kind of court proceeding for her to get a sentence.
No, she was told by the CPS to plead guilty, and so she did, and so it went straight to sentencing. Because if this had been played out in front of the court and they looked at her, you know, back history and her family situation and the tragedy she had gone through, and heard her say, but I deleted it after 2 hours and I didn't mean it, and I have no connection to any far-right groups, she wouldn't be anywhere near a prison cell. Of that I'm certain. And that is what sends chills down my spine. And the fact she's not being given visitation rights because now she's too high profile. They made her high profile. It is sick. It is sick that that poor woman is in prison.
The media made her high profile, I think.
No, she was her sentence televised. They made her high profile because they wanted to use her as an example, which you've said so yourself, as a deterrent. Let's talk. We've got to move on because we could row about this all day, but it's so it really upsets me. This upsets me and scares me, that poor blimmin' woman. Let's talk about Labour apparently releasing a report next week. Yvette Cooper, of course, Home Secretary, is going to be talking about what their crackdown on immigration is going to look like. Now, Duncan Barks and I had fun going through the 5 points on this, and we sort of pulled them apart and said, right, how are you going to do that? Is this in response to the reform surge? Was this always in the offing, do you think? And when they talk about things such as, right, you know, people are going to have a particular skill set, we're going to crack down on, you know, when people are saying, you know, human rights laws to block deportations and so on and so forth. What we're not learning from the mood music is, you know, how that is going to be achieved. Do you think they're going to be able to move the needle on immigration? Because the ONS yesterday said, well, we kind of estimated 350,000 net coming in over the course of the next however many years, which to me is already eye-wateringly too much, and said we've got to revise that up to 500,000. Is this going to get us out of trouble?
I mean, we'll have to wait and see. I think Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is intent on bringing immigration down through any means possible. So I think she is going to do everything within her powers to do that. Whether it'll be successful or not, I don't know. And obviously you have to bear in mind that the economy needs people coming in to fill certain roles. So we're going to have to bring people in if we want the economy to function. So whether that can be balanced with what Yvette wants to do in terms of stopping other people coming in or deporting people, I don't know in terms of numbers, but we'll have to wait and see. But the ONS are the people who are most likely to know because they crunch numbers on this.
Yeah, and it's not looking good, isn't it? I saw you shaking your head when, you know, the sort of age-old argument of we need people to boost the economy. Something else the ONS said yesterday is this isn't going to particularly increase GDP either. So that seems to me to be a bit of a moot point at the moment. And it seems where she's talking about we're going to crack down on this, we're going to crack down on that, I think unless you pull out all the human rights legislation, leave the ECHR and basically get rid of the Supreme Court, you're just as powerless as anybody else when you're talking about cracking down on things like blockages to deportations.
Yeah, well, first of all, the ONS, which is the Office for National Statistics, has just seen the head of it quit because it's been so bad with so many calculations for so long. The Bank of England doesn't trust its numbers anymore and does its own calculations off the back of it. And I think you've seen a report over the weekend that even Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff has said, yeah, I don't think any of these economic arguments about immigration are right, by the way. I think he's realised that the numbers have been totally blown up in one proportion. It doesn't take into account the extra strain that all these extra people have on capital stock, which means things like roads, means things like school places and hospital places and all those sorts of things as well. And we know there are a lot more people in the country than the official numbers say because of sewage and because of the food that's bought and because of the number of SIM cards that are active in the country. The Home Office doesn't actually want to look into any of that because if it does realise there are lots more people here than they officially say there are, well, they're going to have to do something about that as well as all the other people we've got here. And then you talk about the human rights stuff. Yeah, you're going to have to repeal an awful lot of stuff, things like the Human Rights Act of 1998, a sacrosanct piece of Blairism. This idea that perhaps we didn't have any human rights at all before Tony Blair came in is obviously bunkum, but you're going to have to find Labour stripping loads of that off the law books, which I can't see Labour wanting to do, given the Prime Minister's whole life has been around human rights law being more important than almost anything else. And then, yeah, the economic argument of it again, I think that it's totally nonsense. And when you have complete unrestricted immigration on one side, but so many restrictions on business activity on the other, it's no wonder the business will go, OK, well, we'll just pay 10 people really poorly from another country to do this stuff, rather than investing in a cool new robot that could do it. And as a result, Britain is the least automated economy in the OECD of developed nations. So we could have less strain on all of our infrastructure resources, we could deport horrible foreign criminals, and we could have an economy run by cool robots instead of immigration.
Well, there you go. That's cool robots. But this is the problem, isn't it? When you look at the things
sounds like
that...
a horrific future.
When you get the mood music from politicians say, we're going to do this, and the pledges and the promises, you need to find out the mechanism of how. And I think what the previous government found out in the Conservative Party is their hands are tied by a Gordian knot that has built up of, you know, various strata of legislation or entities, be it the Supreme Court, the ECHR, so on and so forth, human rights acts, the canon of case precedent, that it all sounds great saying we're going to do X, Y and Z, but unless you're willing to pull all those things up at the root, tabula rasa and start again, it's very hard to make any progress. But I don't think the Labour Party have any gumption to do that because it's not in their DNA.
What the last government found was that they came in, I mean, Cameron made a promise of bringing immigration down to tens of thousands, and then they carried on for 14 years saying they were going to bring immigration down. They didn't do that. The problem they had every single time was they realised that the economy and public services needed to work. For that to happen, you need people of working age. There aren't enough people of working age in this country to fill all of those roles because we have an ageing population. So we've got more and more and more people over 65 who are not working or over 70. We don't have enough people of working age. We need to fill those roles. There are a lot of British people going overseas. I was talking to somebody yesterday who works in the NHS. He's a junior doctor, and he was saying that lots of the people who trained with him are going to Australia, they're going to Dubai. They can make more money, better terms and conditions, which means we need to bring in people from overseas to staff our hospitals so that we can all get the healthcare treatment that we need. And it's the same in lots of other sectors of society. There are businesses out there who are crying out to get people in to come and work so that they can make the economy work, so we can all get richer.
Does it matter?
There's of course, there's a very clear link between the numbers of people working and GDP.
Here's the big question.
And our society functioning.
But that's not right. Okay,
it's entirely right, and it's been replicated across every Western society. There's an ageing population
More
problem.
people come in, GDP line goes up, yes, but GDP per capita, meaning how rich we all get per person, goes down as a result of this. And I just said before that there are so many restrictions on different parts of the economy that the state puts in. You talk about junior doctors. There is a limit in this country on how many British doctors we are allowed to train to become doctors because the BMA, the union for these people, doesn't want to lose power over them. So we don't let as many Brits become doctors as who want to and as who could. So we scupper their dreams of becoming doctors, and then we find we don't have enough doctors, so we then start importing them from countries that could really probably do with having the best and their brightest people being doctors, looking after them in those developing countries. It's evil, it's wrong, it's mad.
We got to go to advert break now. I mean, the one question that we're not going to have time to get into is, even if all the economic arguments stand up to scrutiny, is it worth destroying your sort of social harmony in the process? Right, let's take an advert break, because after that, this one's going to get people hot under the collar. Starmer's EU reset, which to me, if it looks like we join, if it smells like we join, well, it probably is a little bit of rejoin. We're going to be discussing that after this.
Many of the wars we fought subsequently have been controversial, sometimes actually questionable in terms of their aims. But the men and women who served, they were never, very rarely actually called into question. Yeah. That idea of a British military uniform and it being the best of the best, that's what we need to work towards, hold on to, never don't question it. We need to always interrogate it. But the day we lose pride in that uniform and that service is a very worrying day indeed, I think, Ian.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, guys, I'll tell you what, I didn't give up. Most of my adult life was alienated and ostracised and vilified for most of it, fighting for us to have sovereignty, to wind the clock forward less than a decade since that historic vote, the Prime Minister to go, oh yeah, let's have a Swiss model of paying into Brussels' budget in return for access to the single market. No. That is not what we went and had a massive, what ended up being very divisive referendum to achieve. And yet there's a big summit next week, and it seems to me Sir Keir Starmer is eyeing up this idea of access to... We have access to the single market. It's not like there's zero trade with the EU all of a sudden. This is basically paying to follow their rules again. This, honestly, whether you want to be in the EU or not want to be in the EU, surely, Mike, it amounts to a betrayal of what people voted for.
Well, people did vote for us to leave the European Union. We left the European Union. We left the European on terms that people didn't vote for. People didn't vote for the kind of Brexit that we got. Boris Johnson just negotiated it. They
voted for leaving the EU and all of its institutions. That was the wording.
No, they didn't. They voted to leave the EU, and they were very specifically promised that that did not mean leaving the single market and the customs union. In the event, that got turned into leaving the single market and the customs union, which is perfectly logical. That's now where we are. What that's done is make us all a hell of a lot poorer. So all of us are poorer. There are fewer jobs. Our wages have been kept down. There's less incoming investment from other nations and foreign investors. It's made all of our lives worse. What Keir Starmer's trying to do is keep Brexit, so not go back on that vote. And you're right, people did vote for that. And it's right, therefore, that we're out. But what he's trying to do is make the best of a bad job. So do a Brexit that makes us less worse off.
James, I mean, there's 1,000 things I could say. But it's your job to do that instead of me right now.
Unsurprisingly, I disagree with this idea that it's made us enormously poorer in all kinds of ways. Just in the past week, we've seen the first glimpses of what an independent trade policy will look like with India, with the United States. Those deals are not perfect, but they're a start. They're good, and they're good relative to what the EU has had. And lots of people say, you'll never get a deal with India, you'll never get a deal with America. Well, it's happened, and those are the two, I would say, big economies of the future. Whilst Europe, much like Britain, hasn't grown at all, because Europe, much like Britain, has put stupid rules on itself that has held back that kind of growth. Anything that ties us into those sorts of sclerotic, terrible rules will be a bad thing. Don't take it from me, take it from big tech companies, big AI companies, which, again, the technology of the future. You can get cool new things happening in the UK that you cannot get in the European Union because they've got stupid backwards rules to protect a European AI industry that doesn't exist at all. But if we want to have access to these things, I think that we, as Brexiteers, shouldn't be against the idea of improving trade relations with European countries. I think that any time that countries really get in the way of businesses and individuals trading with each other, I think that's a stupid thing. I think that adds friction. I think the businesses know best, much so, more certainly than companies, than countries do, than politicians do. But the deal there is, as you say, if you're just going to pay to have to take rules and not have any say in those sorts of things, I think that's the worst of all worlds.
Mike, if you were paying Brussels and you're following all their rules and you're bringing in youth mobility, which is free movement with an age cap, essentially, what bit of Brexit's actually left? What have we got left?
Well, the thing is, when you're in the European Union, you have to agree with everything that Brussels says. You agree with all of the rules. You can't. Well, you can opt out of some of them, but you can't opt out of many of them. And it's an agreement kind of in perpetuity unless you do what we do, which is leave the European Union. If we have some kind of trade agreement, a better trade agreement with the EU, we retain all sovereignty. We've just come to an agreement with somebody else, just like we came to agreement with the US last week, or we came to agreement with India last week as well. You can then leave that agreement at any time. So you haven't lost any sovereignty.
Hold on,
you're just using your sovereignty to make your country richer, which is a very sensible thing to do.
With America and India, we don't have to pay them, for a start, to do trade with them. And secondly, if we want to export things to America, those products have to follow the rules that America stipulates. But not everybody. Just the people who want to send that stuff to America. What the EU demands is we pay them and we follow all the rules universally. My question was, if we then add free movement with the age cap, the youth mobility scheme, what Brexitiness have we got left?
I mean, I don't really understand why people are against youth mobility agreement, because our young people in Britain, they are the most restricted young people in all of Europe. All the other young people in Europe, they can travel anywhere they want, they can work anywhere they want, they can fall in love with whoever they want, they can go to university wherever they want. British young people, they can't do any of those things.
Even with the Turing scheme, which actually enables them to go to Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Argentina.
It really isn't comparable in terms of the freedom
it's better.
Well, it isn't better at all. I mean, partly it only affects university students, whereas, of course, young people in Europe, they don't have to university to go somewhere else. They can just go and work at a bar, they can go and do an apprenticeship, they can do whatever they want. British young people are greatly restricted. That makes me pretty sad, and I would like British young people to have the freedom and the opportunity that young people have in other countries. Most of these people were too young to vote in the referendum, so it's not like they even voted for this to happen, they're just living in the reality of it. So that is one thing. And in terms of the trade relationship, and the best way I describe it, with Russia, obviously in Ukraine, we put loads of sanctions on Russia. We've basically made it much, much harder for them to trade. That is meant to make their economy poorer. So that's what we're doing to them as a bad thing. With the Brexit settlement we have, we've basically done that to ourselves. We've made it more difficult for us to trade with our biggest trading partner.
Or conversely, did the EU do that to us? Because the EU are just totally intransigent. James, but we've got to go to break soon.
They have free trade within the EU. We chose to leave that.
At the expense of any free trade with anyone else around the globe.
That was our choice.
Isn't it?
Well, their economy's doing better than ours. Their stock market's taking... Their stock market is taking off. The US stock market is tanking right now. Europe's doing way better.
That's completely the wrong way of looking at this.
It's done really badly since Brexit because people have stopped investing in the UK.
In America, they have, on average, you're about 60% better off per person, right? They are vastly richer in the United States than we are in either Britain or in Europe, because America doesn't do all of the stupid rules that hold back businesses, that hold back individuals, and doesn't tax them as harshly, right? The German economy has been in recession for years, and that's with the Germans not doing anything to help on that Russian conflict. To compare the sanctions on Russia with what we're doing, now, well, to start with, they wanted to give 5,000 helmets and nothing else, and the Ukrainians had to go and pick it up themselves.
The Germans
now they've started to, from a very, very low base.
The Germans have given the second largest amount of money after the US.
Right, in terms of, and they have no army themselves, and they still rely on American soldiers in Germany to protect Europe.
The Germans have spent a lot of money defending Ukraine.
It is ridiculous how weak European defences are, and that's because the Americans were looking after us. And so all the while that the European Union could and should have been building up its defences and taking a stronger line on Russia, rather than taking all of Russian gas, as Germany does, by the way, or did do before the sanctions came in, we could have been doing much more sensible things. And if the European Union had been better and more sensibly governed, maybe we would never have left, because the rules wouldn't have been so stupid. But they were, so we did.
Well, we created most of those rules, in fairness.
We've got to go to a break now, because I'm well overdue. But essentially, it does seem like we're going. Well, it's back again, isn't it? The B word. Right, we're going to take a short break now. There is more chewing the cud, let's say. It's a bit more fisticuffs than that, isn't it? Coming up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. These two are just jabbering away. They're like, rah, 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 on air, and then as soon as it goes to adverts, it's like sharing all the cool gossip from the corridors of power. It's like, did you know such and such? Well, he's from midlife crisis, and I'm like, ooh, what's going on here? Not to be shared on air, unfortunately. Now, let's talk about someone else who hasn't just had a midlife crisis, a whole life crisis, seemingly, in my mind, which is the leader of the hard left Workers' Party of Britain, George Galloway. You know, him of pretending to be a cat in the Big Brother house. He is, first of all, it's basically the sort of platinum package of looking like a total... he's collected an award honouring Ismail Haniyeh, who is the assassinated former political head of Hamas. I don't know what the award is, but the award has been named after the former Hamas leader. He flew to none other than the wonderful regime of Iran to get that particular accolade. And once he had finished hanging out with the Ayatollah and being sort of showered in Islamist joy, he then found himself going over to the Red Square in Russia to watch the Victory Day parade, where you have the guest list of the scummers of international geopolitics are all in attendance, and was saying it was so wonderful. It was the most moving moment. Look at all this moving, emotional, inspiring, humbling. Was what is the picture of him with his wife. I like her snatchy little outfit, mine. That's quite a look. But anyway, there he is over in Russia celebrating their Victory Day, and the guest list to that occasion was not exactly the sort of people you want round for a dinner party. I mean, Mike, George Gallery. Is he necessary evil, so to speak? Is he a sort of cartoon villain that it doesn't hurt to have in politics? Or is it surprising that this man hasn't been dragged in by the counter-terror police to ask quite how he got those invitations?
I don't think he's good news at all. I mean, what on earth he was doing in Russia, I don't know. I mean, I'm very glad that he isn't a member of parliament anymore. I mean, he briefly won that by-election a couple of years ago, but then lost at the next election, which I'm very, very, very glad about. So I'm glad he's not a current feature in our politics. But it does, I mean, obviously it's an unpleasant thing that he is still around, and of course he may well run again in future, and he does seem to have this ability to gain support in some parts of the country and, you know, at least briefly become an MP. But of course, whenever he does become an MP, he never does any work and then he loses his seat to the next election.
I reckon he's got some spicy connections, doesn't he? Because I'm pretty sure if I went on, you know, cheeky little hollybobs over to Iran to collect some sort of Hamas certificate and then seemingly got invited by the Kremlin to cheer on their missiles, I would probably find myself in some sort of dungeon somewhere being questioned at length for who I was mates with.
Well, there's still time for him to be picked up at Heathrow on his return, isn't there? Whisked off to this dungeon. It reminds me of the great criticism that Christopher Hitchens levelled at him. You know, it's a pity that you're running out of more dictators to suck up to. And this was after he praised Saddam Hussein's courage and indefatigability, or whatever it was, right? This is a horrible, terrible, as you say, villainous cartoon-type figure. I had to explain to my American wife, who'd never heard of him, who he was recently, and
George Galloway,
pulling up the footage of him pretending to be a cat on Celebrity Big Brother, and was it drinking fake milk out of Rula Lenska's hands or whatever, and she thought this must have been a parody rather than a member of parliament. But we should, on a serious point, Mike says, you know, he does have this ability to get elected, and we should dig into why that is. He appeals to a growing section of British society who want to hear evil crackpot conspiracy theories about Jews. He wants to hear about how evil Britain and America are on the world stage, especially how evil Israel is, and how Iran and Russia are actually the goodies. And there are many, many people now who walk amongst us in this country who believe that and want to vote for someone who peddles that evil. That's very dangerous.
Interestingly, Mike, that brings me on to the idea that actually when it comes to political parties who have suffered the most from, let's say, the more sort of sectarian politics that we haven't really had traditionally in the UK, the pro-Gaza MPs, of which we have 5, 6 if you add our mate Jeremy, maybe, the idea of a Muslim voting bloc, who, frankly, have been very, open and honest about that is what we are. There's an entity called the Muslim Vote. John Ashworth lost his seat, a pretty gnarly campaign that I think got pretty tasty. Jess Phillips, in her constituency, she didn't call out what it was. She said, it's men. No, it's not.
Which men?
We know what was going on there. I think Wes Streeting is vulnerable in his constituency as well to this sort of growing block of people who aren't looking at politics through the prism of Britain, this nation and this country, but looking at it very much through the sort of prism of the Ummah and what's going on in Gaza. And Labour are the people who are most at risk of this. How does the Labour Party deal with it? How much does this worry you?
Well, I think it's entirely understandable that people here from who've come from other nations, either themselves or their forebears, whether that's from the Middle East or whether that's from India or Pakistan, you know, there are people who are very concerned about what's going on in Kashmir, and understandably, it's completely understandable that they would look at how they vote from a UK perspective and from a global perspective, because they have links and backgrounds and concerns that we don't necessarily share or not share in the same way exactly. So that's perfectly understandable and perfectly human, actually. In terms of what that means for our politics, I think one of the things it means that we need to increase political education in our schools, and I think it does need to change the way that we conduct democracy. But the election we had last year with the 5 4 or 5 Gaza or, pro-Gaza MPs. I mean, that was a response to what they perceived to be the policies of the Conservative Party and of the Labour Party as well, and the fact they were dissatisfied with the response of both of those parties as it came to their response to that crisis.
Is it that simple, James? Because I tend to think, call me a cynic, but I tend to think that this is a sort of irreversible step forwards into having religious-based voting and Muslim MPs who make policies for Muslims, because what we've seen in these pro-Gaza MPs is them standing up in Parliament saying we don't want first cousin marriage banned, we want Islamophobia brought in as legislation, this isn't just about money to Israel for weapons or anything like that, that they're using this as leverage in order to achieve something which, once it begins to happen and as demographics change in the UK, is very hard to reverse. And what we do know, and this isn't sort of smearing all Muslim MPs, far from it, but what we do know is where campaigns have taken place with the pro-Gaza vote, they've been scary, they've been ugly. We had, what was the Conservative MP whose constituency office was burnt down?
Mike Freer.
Mike Freer. I mean, this terrifies...
Targeted because he was gay and because he was pro-Israel.
This terrifies me, frankly.
Yeah. I think Mike made the man you said it's a human impulse, and I think that's right. It is deep down that you and I both being from the same city, we talk about it all the time, right? We both joke about different bars in Gloucester and all that sort of stuff when we were growing up, and so we have that kind of connection. It would be natural, therefore, and I think a lot of the anthropological studies show this, that when people look like you tend to trust them more and all these things. So in a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy that we have, you have to do everything you possibly can to try and reduce those differences and highlight things instead the things that we have in common. Things we have in common: we all live in the same place, we have the same system, we have the same common law, we're supposed to then build the same society and the same culture. What's happened in recent decades is that you've got lots of people coming at such a rate they don't need to assimilate, they don't need to integrate, and they can just stay in those little communities, in lots of cases not even learn the English language or the Welsh language if you're in Wales. And I think that has led to very, very, very dark, divisive, tribal style voting and sectarianism. And it doesn't even need to be about the Muslim connection to this kind of thing at all. This happens in lots of other places. This might sound silly at first blush, but think about the movie The Godfather or The Sopranos or something. In America, that is a story about Italians moving to a new country, but then still working for each other's benefit against the main policy and extorting and all the rest of it. So the same kind of thing happens whenever you get different groups moving into different areas. It's a bad thing, it's a really bad thing, and we're going to see a lot more of it now, and it's being funded and pushed by certain other countries who want to spread that kind of divisiveness.
Now, interesting, because this brings us back to the Yvette Cooper immigration plan, where she sort of set out mood music. We don't have the detail in quite how she's going to achieve these things, but one of her key points is we need to make sure we're better integrated. My question is, I'm going to ask you, Mike, how? Like, what are you actually going to do? It's all very well paying lip service so we need to be better integrated. What does that look like? Because I'm pretty sure, to me, I'll tell you what I think it looks like. It's saying banning the hijab at school, everyone's equal, you can make adult choices. No faith schools. I think it's wrong to completely separate kids when they're growing up and have plastic minds and should be learning about culture, to say you're a Muslim at a Muslim school, you're a Jew at a Jewish school. I think all of that's wrong, other than I would stand up and defend Church of England and Catholic schools, because that is still the religion that underpins our nation. But I think it means banning the burqa. Sweden has done this, and what they have found is it's actually been to be quite successful, and they're in one hell of a mess when it comes to the lack of integration. So what does it look like creating integration?
Well, we live in a free country where people are able to make their own choices about what they wear and what they do, and people can make their own choices about what faith they want to follow. For some faiths, that means that they want to dress in a certain way, and I don't think the rest of us should have any problem with that, actually. I do agree. I think it is good if kids can mix when they're at school, but I don't think it's coherent to say, well, you can't have Muslim schools or Jewish schools, and say, well, you also want to keep Church of England schools. I mean, I went to a Church of England school for part of my childhood and had a great time and really enjoyed it, actually, and I enjoyed the fact that it was a church school, and I would want to see those things continue. But it isn't really intellectually coherent or fair for me to say those can continue, but the other ones can't.
Because we predominantly, as a Western country, have built 2,000 years of our civilization, our customs, our legal practices, our democracy, our shared cultural mores on that particular religion. It is still the religion of this nation, and so you need people to adhere to something. You need people to attach to something. You can't just go rainbow world, everyone can be, you know, in their corner as a Christian, a Hindu, a Jew, and all the rest of it, without any predominant underlying sort of common denominator, because that is the opposite of integration.
In terms of integration, there are things the government can do, and I remember back, I mean, it's quite a long time ago now, but the last Labour government, the new Labour government, under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, they invested quite a lot of money in integration, so recognising there were people coming into the country from different ethnic backgrounds and communities and countries and cultures, and they spent quite a lot of money on integration up to 2010, and that was working fairly well. But it was working
was
well.
Was it working very well? We had 7-7. We had people blowing up tubes and buses.
Well, in many parts of the country it was working. And then the Conservatives came in 2010, they got rid of all of that. And that is one of the things that then started to raise tensions. And you did see numbers of people learning English.
We still don't know what these integration policies are. What is she going to say is done to help integration?
Well, there are things that you can do to bring people together.
Like what?
Community centres, faith institutions, churches, bringing faith leaders together,
you just need
educating
a few more youth
people.
Clubs.
I mean, well, youth clubs is one thing, but also teaching people
so weak. It's such
teaching people the English language. It's not weak because it's about
about
relationship, and any integration has to be about relationship. So you have to create forums in which people build relationships with one another. It might be teaching people English. It might be a youth club. It might be a community centre. It might bring in different faith leaders together. There are lots of things that can be done at a local level. It might be a Sure Start centre, but any that brings like mums and kids together from different backgrounds. There are lots of things that can be done, but if you're not doing them, there's going to be a consequence.
Apart from the mum who's not allowed outside the house and the kids who aren't allowed to mix with children from the opposite sex. That's
right. So I think that there are some concrete things that I absolutely think that English language must be a complete compulsory requirement. I think Labour has said that they're going to do that, and give them credit for that if that's true. The idea that you have people here committing crimes, by the way, really horrendous crimes, and they have to answer their not guilty plea through an interpreter, and yet the BBC will still say they're from Derby, right? Because of course in Derby no one can speak any English. Absolute nonsense, by the way. But this idea that it's just some more youth clubs and some community centres is going to stop people wanting to blow people up in the name of a different god or go around knifing people is nonsense. I think that because things have got so bad now, the kinds of activities and interventions the government needs to do are not going to look very soft and cuddly. I think you're right, Alex, that we need to have concrete things like banning cousin marriage. I think like banning different kinds of slaughter that are done of animals, done in a very cruel way. And in the school near me in North London, supposed to be a nice, leafy, you know, tolerant, liberal part of town, there are 5-year-old girls who wear hijabs as part of the school uniform. That girl is not making a decision in that. And what is happening there is that we're saying we think it's fine in London, in Britain, in 2025, that a 5-year-old girl is never going to be allowed to feel the wind in her hair in our country because of some decision that her father makes for her, and she'll be brainwashed into thinking that's okay, but not happening to the boys. If that were any other religion, it would never, ever be allowed.
It's always going to be a sensitive subject. It's a big one for Yvette Cooper to tackle. It'll be interesting to see when she does put meat on bones, if there is such a thing, or if it's just going to be a dead carcass of a promise. We've got to go to break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about a man who once famously compared wearing the burqa to looking like a letterbox. Boris Johnson, is he circling the carrion like the hungry vulture that he is to try and wing his way back into Parliament? We're going to be discussing that after this.
I think it's really important to be clear about this. So much of what is in that green paper is absolutely right. We have to reduce the benefit bill in this country. We have to get people back into work. Work is absolutely the right place for people to be. And I think we've gone through a generation where the benefit bill has skyrocketed. But cutting support for disabled people doesn't solve that problem.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah. Hello, welcome back. See, they're still gossiping away together. I've got tech up in my ear giving the countdown, but you guys, you're like herding cats. Now, talking about herding cats, Boris Johnson, when he was in power, all the things that might have gone on in Number 10. Well, those of us who like looking at the political landscape and looking for sort of ripples on the Richter scale of potential and probability would have noticed that Boris Johnson has popped back up lately, hasn't he? He's got newspaper columns, he's in newsrooms. Oh, I don't want to come over. Polls come out. I wonder who commissioned that poll saying if Boris comes back to lead the Conservative Party, it would beat reform. Do you think that, I'm going to start with you, Mike, do you think that Boris Johnson, if he did come back, can sort of command that support, that overwhelming sort of energy, that surge of optimism that he did in 2019? Or do you think he might be a busted flush?
I think the jury is out on that one. I actually don't know, because he's obviously had peaks and troughs in his career, a number of peaks and troughs in his career. I mean, quite significant peaks and actually very significant troughs as well. So far, he's always managed to turn it around and come back and turn into, you know, the slightly bumbling, slightly funny, charismatic, you know, incredibly intelligent, but also incredibly unpredictable person that he has been. So whether he can come back now after being Prime Minister, after what happened in the pandemic, after Partygate, after all the mistakes of his government, after the complete failure to level up the country as he promised to do, I simply don't know. I mean, people do have quite short memories. People have loved Boris in the past for many reasons. He was, of course, a terrible Prime Minister. I think most people will remember that. But equally, I mean, as we saw in last week's elections, people are clearly dissatisfied in some ways with the options that they've got. People are looking at Farage, but I'm still very sceptical about the fact that people would actually look at Farage and think, I want that guy running the country.
They do, but seemingly
they might want Boris again, so I wouldn't rule it out,
but what's interesting is people are looking to Nigel going, I want that because he's against net zero and he's synonymous with controlling immigration. Boris Johnson, technically speaking, is completely a counterpoint to those things. He presided over record levels of immigration. He was the one who lowered the threshold, the salary threshold to entering the country, and sort of spousal visas for people coming to study. He was the one who loved net zero and put into place into statutes the most sort of onerous targets that in theory we have to meet. Which is kind of the opposite of what Nigel represents, and yet he's seen as the person to take those votes away from Nigel.
Yeah, with all the talents that Boris had, he could have been one of the greats, and it was an unfortunate level of ill discipline. And I don't mean in any of the Partygate stuff or any of that, but in actually focusing on policies to improve the country that was, I think, really his downfall. You mentioned net zero there, you mentioned immigration, this so-called Boris wave of where the new point-style system that was supposed to massively reduce immigration was put in Boris's watch, and what happened? It spiked to levels never seen before, that is having all the kind of destructive impacts on Britain that we've spent the last hour talking about. And I think that if Boris were to try and come back, all Nigel Farage would have to do would be to hold up a graph that would say immigration was going at this ridiculously high level before Boris comes in, and whoom, look, it's gone an even higher level now. Ditto electricity prices because of net zero and other things like that. And I think that his legacy is so weak that I think that will be his undoing.
Now here's a thunk. Way before we have the general election, elections coming up. We've got elections in the Senate in Scotland, but also we're going to have another London mayoral election. Perhaps that's somewhere that you could bring back Boris, and actually the people of London look to things like the Boris bikes and the Boris buses and the Garden Bridge we never had, and the sort of fun and energy he brought to the capital, because he's a bit, you know, frankly speaking, politically, he's a bit more left-wing of the Conservative, or if he has an ideology, a discernible one, and maybe that might be his target, Mike.
I mean, I do feel the need just to point out, because you've mentioned a number of times, inward migration is not destroying the country. We're one of the most successful multicultural countries in the world. People generally live at great peace with one another and generally get on with one another, and it brings a huge amount of richness to our country. And indeed, inward migration makes our economy and our public services work. And also, net zero is entirely necessary because climate change is a major threat. So I'll just say those things just to kind of comment on the things that have been said multiple times.
If this is a great success, I'd hate to see what failure looks like.
That's where he's at.
But in terms of Boris, I don't think he could become London mayor again, because he's been Prime Minister and it would be such a demotion. Like, I just don't think he can go that far back in his career. I mean, that's going back for him, like, you know, 15 or 20 years, and taking that massive demotion. I think the only way for Boris to come back and for it to mean anything to him, and for him to have any amount of pride, is to go back into Parliament, become leader of the Conservative Party and try and become Prime Minister again. Whether he has the ability or the route or the opportunity to do that, I don't know. But I don't think he can do London mayor again.
No, I mean, you know, London Mayor's the one place where I wouldn't mind seeing Boris come back, because I just think he sort of fit that job really nice. He is a good ambassador for the capital city in many respects, and he made it fun. And I did really like it, and I don't really have much love for Sadiq Khan, I must say. But there you go, guys, we've run out of time, so a great thank you to both of you for coming in person, giving up your Sunday morning to spend it with me. And we started off a bit, but sort of ended up more kumbaya, didn't we? How lovely.
We had a great time.
We are the definition of integration. There you are. They should take a leaf out of our books. Thank you ever so much. Right, don't go anywhere, because there's one more hour to go after the break. We're going to be speaking to John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator of The Independent, to look at the week in politics. See you after the other side.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips, in Leeds it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us curry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10 pence, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12 and 60 pence. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks
How
ago.
much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Keeping it real.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. It is the final hour, and I think it's time to sort of, you know, kick back and put your feet up, is it not, to get us through to the 10 o'clock hour. I'm watching through the glass. They're falling apart in the gallery because a few minutes ago, Ted, my producer, wandered in, and under the desk, I've kicked off my shoes. So I have my bare feet out. And he's chatting away with me, and he looked down and went, "Oh, you got your feet out." And then Alicia, who's my second favourite producer, came in, and she's apparently got a foot phobia. So all kicking off about the fact I don't have my shoes on under the desk here. Well, it's Sunday, and I fancy being barefoot Contessa, and I will. It's my show, so there. I'm not going to get them out. I'm not going to sort of do some ballerina move and, like, you know, show you what my toes look like. Don't you worry, that is not about to happen. But what's wrong with taking my shoes off? My studio, there's no one else in it now. When I had company, I didn't take my shoes off, but now it's just me by myself for the next hour. Why not? And they don't smell. Well, not that bad anyway. Right. You weren't expecting that, were you? But thankfully, something I am expecting is our next guest, because he's been fully booked, teed up, and is ready to rock and roll with his views of what's going on in the week in politics. It is time for a big old political roundup with none other than John Rentoul, chief political commentator at The Independent newspaper. Good morning to you, John.
Good morning, Alex. I've got my shoes on.
Have you? You see, you don't need to. You're sitting at home in front of a very impressive bookcase.
Yeah, but my feet will get cold otherwise.
Well, you could. Have you got pyjama bottoms on as well under there?
I'm not going to go into
that. There we go. It's the age-old, age-old COVID, age-old trick of, all that matters is the top half. Right. Let's talk about politics. That's what we've got you here for. And what we're going to do is go through who's had a good week, who's had a bad week, what should we be looking out for, and who, frankly, should be put in an oubliette or at least gagged and, sent into the stationery cupboard to not cause any more trouble. So who do you reckon this week in the great old world of politics is having a good one?
Well, over the past 7 days, I don't think you can overlook the claim of Keir Starmer, our extremely unpopular Prime Minister, who has delivered 2 huge trade deals that his Conservative predecessors were desperate to achieve with India and the United States, the most populous country in the world and the richest country in the world. And he's done the deal, and I don't think anybody can take that away from him.
Some big old Brexit bonuses, some might say. But at the same...
Yeah, they wouldn't have been possible without Brexit. But, I mean, on the other hand, Brexit did cost us a great deal in prosperity, and we're hoping to repair some of that at the London conference on the 19th of May.
We've been having a good old vibrant discussion about that one in these studios. But, contrary to what you say, your counterpart, Mr. Hodges, in the Mail on Sunday, has been chatting, I think it was Dan anyway, chatting away with various griping backbenchers in the Labour Party who said that actually things might not be that good for Keir, that they are potentially going to forge some sort of revolt, and the person they want to replace the top man with is none other than our Ange. I mean, do you think that despite potentially bagging these wins and getting these 2, well, one's a sort of trade agreement and the other's a 11th hour capitulation when it comes to Donald Trump's tariffs, and a precursor potentially
no,
for a
it's
future
not.
trade agreement? It's not a trade agreement, is it? Not really.
It is. It's a trade agreement that reduces our tariffs, so therefore it's a good thing.
I suppose this is an agreement over the way we trade, as opposed to a fully fledged,
it's not a fully fledged free trade agreement. It is.
Yeah. I mean, look,
it will make us slightly better off, and therefore it is a good thing and should be welcome. But Dan is absolutely right. I mean, the Labour Party is in a terrible state, and this won't do Keir Starmer any good. Particularly, I mean, obviously it would have been worse if he hadn't achieved these deals, but he's not going to get any gratitude from the electorate for it, because I mean that's politics. You just don't get gratitude for doing the right thing, especially when the benefits of it are so abstract. I mean, it just means things will be slightly cheaper over the years. I mean, the one with India is important because that's a huge growth opportunity in the future. But Dan Hodges is absolutely right. Labour MPs are revolting, and Angela Rayner is waiting to pounce.
I mean, so far, considering he's got so many bums on benches, and I remember who was it he removed the whip from when they voted against, was it child benefits or something, very early on in his premiership?
Very early on, it was the 2-child limit on.
That's right, and he sort of booted people out.
Seven Labour MPs voted against the King's.
Yes, I insist.
And he lost the whip.
Yeah, iron fist, do as I say or you're out. And he's actually managed to sort of contain things. And considering how many MPs he's got, there seems to be compared to the Tories, anything looks like party discipline, doesn't it? But is there a problem that the minute one person goes a bit postal, the rest begin to follow, and that this could now start being the challenge to his authority?
Well, I think there has been a lot of unhappiness bubbling under the surface, but for a long time, obviously Labour MPs felt the need to maintain discipline because they recognise that the party unity is important, and that they're only going to get jobs in government if they behave themselves. But someone like Louise Haigh yesterday, who Keir sacked as Transport Secretary, is under no illusions that she's coming back. So she's speaking out quite forcefully, and there will be more of those in the next few weeks.
Now, I can't remember whether it's sort of Newton's third law or something, which says each and every force has an opposing equal force, or something along those lines. I am no physicist. But one would assume Mr. Keir Starmer's having a good week. Perhaps the leader of the opposition isn't. So Kemi, I think, is your nomination for who's having a bad week.
Indeed. I mean, as you say, equal and opposite. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I think that's the.
There you go. Well done.
That's the Newtonian law. And yes, so obviously, if Keir's having a good week, then Kemi must be having a bad week. But she has made it worse because she should have welcomed these trade deals. I think. I mean, she should have just bit her lip. And welcomed them. And pointed out, obviously, that they weren't as good as Keir was pretending, but she should have welcomed them. Instead, she said that they were bad deals and she wouldn't have agreed them. And she managed to spell Keir's name wrong when she tweeted about it and had to delete the tweet and rewrite it. So she's been having a pretty rough time this week.
I mean, she's had a rough time pretty much since the moment she became Conservative Party leader. She was supposed to be the sort of great unifier, the exciting new offering. I must admit, when she became leader, I thought this is going to be spicy, this is going to be interesting. And other people said to me, nah. And actually, the nah brigade have kind of been proven right, haven't they?
Well, I don't know about that. I think she's in an impossible position. I mean, leader of the opposition is the worst job in British politics. No question about it. It's very difficult. It's extremely difficult if you have just been thrashed in a general election and the voters have taken a view that you've betrayed them. Your party has betrayed them completely over the preceding 5 years. So she's inherited an extremely difficult position. I think she's made about as good a job of it as she can. I think she's refreshing. I like listening to her. I think she is different from other politicians. She makes a lot of sense. But she's in an utterly impossible position.
Yeah, and the problem is with these Tories is they're sort of, they're not very patient when it comes to giving their leaders an opportunity to turn things around, and you have to wonder how long she is for this world. I would hope they don't play the let's change leader game because we're all kind of tired
because that
of it.
won't do any good. That just misunderstands what their problem is. Their problem is that the voters want to punish them for betraying them, especially on the issue of immigration.
And I think also punish them for changing Prime Minister so many blimmin' times, which seemed like a sort of vainglorious nonsense.
Yes, for giving them Liz Truss, making such a mess of things.
Now, who are you going to keep your beady eye on over the course of the next week?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing from the new MP for Runcorn, Sarah Pochin. Who was elected by 6 votes on May the 1st. She hasn't spoken in the House of Commons yet. I don't know if she's going to make. I mean, I'm surprised we still call them maiden speeches. You would have thought that language would have moved on. But anyway, I'm looking forward to her maiden speech because I mean, MPs' maiden speeches are always interesting because they set out what the MP is like. And you get a sense of what they really care about. And I'm looking forward to finding out who she is.
I think we all are, actually. And, I mean, it's going to be a lot for most new MPs sort of appear on the scene and have their sort of ushering into Parliament and begin to sort of settle into the fabric. But she's in a position where she's one of 5 now and the first female elected in the House of Parliament. We mustn't forget Dame Andrea Jenkins, of course, the Lincolnshire Mayor. But there's going to be an incredible spotlight on her, and she's a complete newbie to the business.
Yeah, no, and it'll be interesting to see how that affects the dynamics of the reform group in the House of Commons, which is small but attracts quite a lot of attention. I mean, I often spend Prime Minister's questions watching Nigel Farage because he's often there, and you know his faces are a sort of side commentary on what's going on.
Yeah, there should be a sort of Parliament Channel red button where you can just have Nigel Farage reaction cam, like on Britain's Got Talent. They got someone's nana at the side of the stage, and it makes the audience cry because, you know, Mrs. Megan says, "Oh, my boy," and we were like, "Oh, isn't it lovely?" You know, that would actually be a brilliant thing. The Farage watch box in the corner of the screen. I'd be up for it. Now, someone who should be put into an oubliette, perhaps, in fact, they're already there. Who should be taking a week off next week, John?
Well, I think Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, needs to take a bit of a break because he launched a huge Conservative policy this last week, and nobody noticed. It was a bill on immigration. It had some big new policy initiatives about setting aside the European Convention on Human Rights on immigration cases, and a lot of other things in it as well. It was supposed to be a huge repositioning of the Conservative Party, and it got almost no attention at all. So I think you know, he's a lovely chap. He works very hard, but there's just no point. He's shouting into the void. Time to take the week off.
Why does nobody care? Is it the timing of this? Did he sort of bring something out when everyone was sort of swept up in other matters politic, and so it didn't really get the right sort of airtime? Or is it because he happened to have been the immigration minister in the last government, and so you kind of go, well, you know, you had your opportunity, son.
Exactly. I think that's a fundamental problem that the Conservatives face, is that whenever they propose a new policy, people will say, well, why didn't you do that 10 months ago when you were in power and had the chance to do it? And, you know, that is part of Kemi Badenoch's problem, is that not only does she have to overcome this sense of betrayal, everything she puts forward, or her shadow ministers put forward, is met with this response, well, why didn't you do it when you were in power?
Now, one thing we have to look forward to next week, which is going to be one of the biggest tests, I think, for the Labour Party, is Yvette Cooper's plans to really cut back on immigration, really sort of grasp the nettle when it comes to deporting foreign criminals and people who are here illegally who should be sort of, you know, put on a plane and sent back from whence they came. She's been doing the rounds this morning. Let's have a listen to her speaking to Trevor Phillips on our rival channel this morning, Sky News.
How are you going to get people who've overstayed their visas? First, how are you going to find them? And secondly, are you going to drag them onto planes?
So we're doing a major digital overhaul now with the introduction of e-visas. It's effectively like a digital ID now for all overseas citizens. It will set out whether people have a right to work or not. That means we've then got much clearer systems in place to be able to track whether people have actually returned at the point that they should have done at the end of their visa or not, to be able to then take follow-up action, and also new equipment for the big increase in illegal working raids that we've also done. That's been about a 40% increase in illegal working raids since the election.
She didn't quite answer the question of whether this is going to be involving rounding people up and dragging them onto aeroplanes, which is kind of what Trevor Phillips was asking. The problem is, of course, that is where the blockage in the system seems to lie, which is they can sort of bring people and say, we've got to deport you X, Y and Z, but then these people seem to have a way of having appeals, and then they, you know, have sympathetic judges, or the canon of a case precedent comes into play, or the ECHR, chicken nuggets, you know the stuff, John.
I do know the stuff, but Alex, the point about the chicken nuggets case is that was turned down. The upper tribunal ruled that the Sun's preference for British chicken nuggets was not a good enough reason to keep him in this country. So that has been wildly misreported. But no, yes, Yvette Cooper has the second most difficult job in British politics, I think, which is trying to present the government's case on immigration.
No, I think you're right. And I mean, do you think there's going to be much meat on the bones coming up? Because there was one particular, we've been talking about it earlier, one particular sort of one of her 5 points that she wants to address in this paper next week is we need to improve integration. And that's always, all right, how are you going to do that then?
Yeah,
that's the hard one.
Yeah, well, this age-old story about immigrants must learn English. I mean, we get this sort of on a sort of annual cycle, basically. Whoever's in government proposes it, and it sort of disappears into the sand because it's irrelevant. Because most immigrants do learn English, do speak English, or learn it. Because that's how they survive and prosper in British society. So that is irrelevant. I mean, the question is, can she stop the boats, and can she reduce legal immigration? And we've got to see what the small print on that is. But on stopping the boats, basically, we seem to be still relying on the French. The French don't have much of an incentive to stop the boats, and nobody yet has come up with an answer to that. I mean, even the Rwanda scheme wasn't a very convincing answer, and the Labour government don't even have that.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with that, and if that's going to be as memorable as Chris Phillips' immigration draft bill. John Rentoul, thank you ever so much. Fantastic catching up with you. We're going to take a break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking all things tech, because we increasingly live in a world where there are big things taking place. I mean, actually, even Yvette Cooper talking about we're going to start using tech and digital e-cards and this, that and the other to monitor and track whether people are here and they shouldn't be here, and etc. We now live in a world of AI, but we also live in a world where, well, certain issues that might needed to be conquered earlier, I always think about the sort of age limitations on watching pornography, etc., and now big talking points. So that's going to be our focus after this.
There are lots of people now who are excited and enthused by the prospect of being in social media, becoming little mini stars.
Yeah.
Because that's the sort of world we find ourselves in now. Everybody wants fame for 5 minutes, and that was their route to doing it. And I just hope, actually, the fact that they've been convicted reminds the whole of the nation that no matter how crazy an idea you've got in your head, you need to respect people and the community and the country in which you live.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Now, coming up in the offing is going to be our big old tech rundown. There's some brilliant stories in this week. I'm looking forward to chewing over those. But before we do, it'd be remiss of me on a Sunday. It feels like a bit of a Sunday tradition to get together as a family, have a roast dinner and gossip about the royal family. So that is what we're going to do. First, I'm joined now by the wonderful Michael Cole, royal commentator and writer. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Alex. Yes, a lot to talk about. It's been a very busy week and a very successful week for the royal family. As you probably saw, the Thanksgiving service, I thought, was a highlight of the VE Day commemorations and celebrations of peace in Europe. Highlights, I thought, in particular, the wonderful service in the Abbey. The music was wonderful. It was very formal, but there were these wonderful touches which were so individual. The 10-year-old great-great-grandson of Winston Churchill lighting the candle of peace, and then the children giving white roses of peace to the 78 veterans who were there. That was a wonderful moment in a very formal but very friendly and a rather intimate occasion, which I thought spoke volumes about the character of this country and how it came through. Of course, one veteran no longer with us, of course, was the King's dear departed mother. And of course, what we did see during those coverage was the wonderful photographs, film of her in her uniform actually on VE Day with her parents and her 50-year-old sister, Margaret, on the balcony. That was the night before the night she went out and joined the crowds. Fascinating thing also, the shots of Winston Churchill standing with the King and the Queen. Of course, that was 7 years after Neville Chamberlain stood there after coming back from Munich, selling out the Czechs, I'm afraid, the Munich Agreement, the Sudetenland. And there were huge crowds cheering that at that time. And of course, Winston Churchill was regarded in those days as a warmonger. But of course, his value came very much to the fore, and the King and the Queen got very firmly behind him, and he came out on the balcony there. It's very fascinating, and it was a wonderful occasion, I think, for the whole country and for the world.
Yeah, I thought that this year's VE Day, I mean, it really did I thought it had a brilliant amount of cut through. We did a huge special. I was in here last week, and we did a huge special of people phoning in with their own memories, and it really touched my soul in a way that perhaps it hasn't before. Although one of my take-home memories from the particular commemoration was actually Queen Camilla sitting next to Sir Keir Starmer, looking like she'd rather be sitting next to a homeless drunk. That I thought was a brilliant sort of fun optics. But another big event has happened, and when big events happened, our royals go out representing the country as ambassadors, and it was, of course, the Pope's funeral, and Prince William went out to that, so relegated to second or third row in the Vatican. But it's now going to be the new Pope's inauguration, Pope Leo XIV. I keep wanting to say Louis XIV, I can't help it. And it's not going to be William this time, but Prince Edward is being sent out on royal duties.
Yeah, Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, after his father. Everybody in the slimmed-down royal family has to pull their weight now. He's going to go out on the 18th of May, as you say, a huge open-air liturgical event, a mass inauguration. Of course, it used to be for 800 years a papal coronation. The last one of those was 1963 with Pope Paul VI. Since then, there has been no coronations, and the papal tiara is no longer needed quite so urgently. But he will be there, and it's not in any sense that new, because when Pope Francis was inaugurated in 2013, it was the Duke of Gloucester went out, and when Pope Benedict XVI in 2005, it was the old Duke of Edinburgh went out there. But what you're seeing, I think, Alex, is that it's a slimmed-down royal family. If you looked at the balcony for the fly past, there used to be 26, 28 members of the royal family up there. The King wanted a slimmed-down royal family, and my goodness, he has it. But wasn't it good also to see the Duke of Kent there? 89, he, of course, inherited the title of Duke of Kent when he was only 6 years old, because he was very much affected by the war. His father, the Duke of Kent, was killed in an air crash in 1942 on a hillside in Scotland. And to see him there was very, very poignant, I thought, particularly on this celebration of victory in Europe and peace for the world. So everybody's got to do their bit. But I think, Alex, what was wonderful about the whole week was to see how brilliantly the King did, because we can forget, that he's undergoing treatment for cancer constantly. And he came through it brilliantly, and he looked as if he enjoyed it immensely. And that occasion in the Abbey was followed up by, of course, that rather surprise to many people speech he made in the evening at the concert in Horse Guards Parade, when he came on and delighted the people, and exactly at the hour that his grandfather, King George VI, had spoken to the nation at the end of World War II. And of course, it had the King's touch to it, saying that he wouldn't be following the example of his mother and be dancing and through the night, and he wouldn't be leading the crowd in a conga going back to Palace. So, I mean, he showed his sense of humour. And I thought it was a really wonderful British occasion. If you contrast that with the parade that went on in Moscow with nuclear missiles and tanks, all the rest of it, that sort of thing, I thought it was very, of course it was formal, but it was very friendly, it was very down to earth, it was very characteristically British, and I think people really enjoyed it. And a lot of people who hadn't realised, there we are, you see the veterans, they were very much central to the whole thing. And I think that was very important, introducing the Prince of Wales there.
It was a beautiful occasion, amazing opportunity to recollect and remember the sacrifices made, celebrate peace. And like you said, in stark contrast to warmongers who use the occasion to try and stimulate warmongering. Now, talking about warmongering, Meghan seems to pop to mind. I mean, Harry, of course, doing that dreadful interview of the BBC where he did actually start speaking about his father's health. But, you know, you might think, do you know what those two need? They need somebody to tell them what to do because they keep making mistakes. Well, don't worry, look no further, because the Duchess of Sussex has hired an administrator who previously worked for Bill Gates as her first chief of staff. Sarah Fosmo is her name, 45 years old, is going to be her most senior advisor. Problem is, though, it seems to me, Michael, is Meghan doesn't really like taking advice.
Will she take advice from a woman who's slightly older than she is? She's said to be warm and approachable and very practical, and her job is to launch Meghan on the next stage of her fascinating career. And there we see them on a wonderful day of their wedding, when they couldn't have been more popular and they couldn't have been more welcomed by the British people, standing there in Windsor Great Park 20 deep. What a shame all that ended, isn't it? And of course, that's one of the reasons for the thin down royal family. No Duke of Sussex, Duke and Duchess of Sussex on the balcony, no Duke of York and his retinue on the balcony. All a great shame. Interestingly, you mentioned the BBC interview, because it's not only Meghan who has a new chief of staff, but the Prince also has a lady called Leanne Cashin, and she actually arranged that BBC interview which you mentioned, and she took over from a man called Josh Kettler, who was a veteran PR supremo. He quit after 6 months. I do think that the Sussexes have a little bit of a problem keeping staff, because they've been through about 18 different appointments since. Yes, that many. Can you imagine? Gosh. It must be a bit of a revolving door there. But obviously, they do things in their own way. It's California. They probably think this is quite normal. But we stand back and admire or not.
Now, before I let you go very quickly, because I'm going to be running over, there's been rumours that in America, the police have got hold of videotape from Jeffrey Epstein's house, and that might find its way into the public, or at least descriptions of what it shows might find its way into the public domain, and fears perhaps now that there might be video evidence of quite what Prince Andrew may or may not have gotten up to. I mean, if something like that were to wend its way into the pages of the press, wow, that is bad news.
Well, I'm sure that we would all be interested. I think Prince Andrew has said recently that although he visited this rather splendid townhouse, apparently the most spectacular one in the whole of Manhattan, which is saying quite something, but he didn't actually stay there during this visit. That was part work, part relaxation, apparently, all those years ago. Well, if it does get into the paper, I'm sure Page 6 will have it, and you will have it, and we will judge it. That's a story that obviously doesn't stop going, much to the discomfort of Prince Andrew.
Indeed. Michael, always great catching up with you. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful and restful Sunday. Before we go to break, it's your opportunity to find out how you can win tickets to the sporting event of the year, the final of the European Champions League in Munich. And not only that, we're going to give you a 5k to spend while you're there. Good luck to your liver. This is how.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive $5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Now, I'm not a techie, I'm more of a Luddite. The last time I was able to properly function on a computer was sort of Windows 95 or something like that. I remember word art. I used to love word art. Everyone used to love a bit of word art, especially when you could sort of blow up the bubble letters, put them in a semicircle, that was all the rage, and put on a metallic effect so it would look like gold. And we all thought we were sort of like, you know, the height of IT ingenuity back then. But wow, have things changed. Thankfully, to guide me through it is Davis Fang, who is our tech presenter. Hello, Davis.
Hi, Alex. Great to see you.
Now, a subject that is very close to my heart is I have been campaigning for so long about pornography. Now, I would personally see user-generated pornography banned. I think like any other sort of industry that comes with a public health warning. There needs to be regulation, not just any old character putting up any old video for any old person to watch it. But at least now we have got, after the Online Safety Act, age verification to make sure of the cohorts who are watching some of the rancid things that are available online, it isn't 8-year-old kids. But apparently people aren't necessarily following the rules.
Yeah, so this is quite a complicated matter. So essentially the UK, or Ofcom rather, is finally cracking down on pornography online. However, through the Online Safety Act, there are a few issues with that. There are a few concerns that people are talking about. So it doesn't just apply to pornography websites, which a lot of people are thinking that, that it applies to. Rather, it also applies to basically any sort of website that can host adult material, and that includes social media. And what the Ofcom wants these websites to do is basically to form some sort of age verification. And we've talked a lot of times on this channel about how that can be implemented, and unfortunately that's quite difficult, because how do you actually make sure that a website is being viewed by someone over the age of 18? Like, that is quite difficult. And there are a few solutions, but none of them are entirely ideal. For example, Discord. Are you familiar with Discord, Alex?
I'm not familiar at all with Discord.
Well, Discord is basically an online messaging app that's used by a lot of younger people, especially gamers. And basically, as we can see on this screen, what it wants new users in the UK to do is basically scan their face. So you are providing your identity and your face to a system, which could potentially get hacked. And if we are going to apply that to all adult websites, then quite possibly, do you really want your online details to be associated with quite possibly a dodgy website?
Right, you've got to question why you should be visiting that dodgy website in the first place. I would say it is karma, personally. But it's good to know that there's some implementation. It shocked me the other day, David, you know, I was on X, which is the only sort of social media I really use. I was looking at, there's a sort of post about Bonnie Blue.
Yes.
And I was reading something about her, and I went to click on her profile. I was like, whoa! I didn't realise that you could actually get all of her...
Yeah, I do have to admit, X is a little bit... It feels unregulated, because while you're just scrolling normal content, all of a sudden adult content can be right in your face with little to no warning. So I think X is definitely one of those social media platforms that will be affected by this act, which comes in. Well,
the easy thing is just to say to all platforms, no adult content at all under decency, unless you're an adult website, and if you are, make sure you're regulated and you have, you know, the sort of barrier for entry like you would a pub.
Yeah, unfortunately, if X were to remove all pornography, they might see the same situation that happened to Tumblr, where they lost practically all of their users.
Oh, shame. My heart would bleed. Right, now, apparently, I mean, AI is coming thick and fast. Even I, the other day, found myself on Grok, asking it to generate something for me. And it's amazing how quickly it's improving. Like, Grok has gone from strength to strength. You can now actually make it ask it to do things, and it's like, wow, that's creepy. But apparently I'm not the only one who's been sneakily using a bit of Grok in my spare time.
Yeah, apparently 1 in 3 workers in the UK secretly use AI during the day. Like, can I ask, have you ever used AI during your work?
Apart from asking Grok to make me a logo for something the other day, no.
Well,
I mean, if I start allowing AI and like sort of artificial Alex, I'm done. There's no job. I'm over. My capital is being a human being, basically.
Yeah, I felt the same way in a lot of aspects. But 29% of UK employees apparently are using AI tools in secret at work, and apparently 28% of these people do so in the fear of possibly being fired if they were to be discovered to use AI. And however, 38% of that see it as a secret advantage. However, it's not so secret.
What are they using it for? If it's like, you know, dear ChatGPT, can you write this email for me? I mean...
To be fair, yeah, like with emails especially, like I used to spend a long time writing each email. Now I just like roughly type what I want it to do, and then it just rewrites it for me in a, you know, very generic professional sense. And I guess also this is quite useful for me recently, but you know, I need to do a lot of research. I need to do a lot of notes. And what you can do with Google's Gemini now now is transform that into a podcast. So you give it all the material that you want to learn, and it generates a fake podcast. And I think that's quite fascinating.
Well, so you could literally, I could say to it, you know, dear whatever it was called, I want to learn all about, I don't know, the Byzantine Empire between the dates of something and something. And then it can, like, it'll generate it, and I can literally go to bed at night listening to it.
Precisely, and that's what I do. Obviously, you do need to know the material quite well, because it can hallucinate false material. However, if you roughly do know what you're talking about, it can be a great way to revise your information. So there's that.
But honestly, every single day something's been invented or exists that I didn't know about the day before. We've got that Discord app. Not that I don't want to go on that. I don't know what that is. Doesn't look good. And now sort of self-generating podcasts into what you're. I mean, that saves. And what am I going to do? Normally I go to In Our Time when I want to go to sleep. You don't know In Our Time, do you? Like,
no idea, I'm afraid.
It's got over 1,000 episodes now on BBC Sounds. It's been going on for ages on Radio 4. It's this old cove called Melvin Bragg who talks to people about philosophy and history, and it always starts off with him going, hello. And then they start, today we're going to be talking about King Carolus III. And it's quite dry, really, but that's why it's so brilliant to go to bed with. But now maybe I'm going to be using Gemini and, you know, asking it for all sorts of bespoke, curated content. One thing that we do know, because we've been talking about it a lot today, is the world has changed when it comes to what you post on social media and the authorities' reactions to it. And apparently, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, those who like turning up on your doorstep, boys in blue if you happen to have tweeted something unsavoury, is saying that they want Ofcom to have more powers.
Yeah, so Sir Andy Cook said this week that Ofcom lacks the authority to actually swiftly remove posts on social media. And actually, that is stepping a little bit out of line, because the Online Safety Act at the moment proposes that Ofcom basically is supposed to regulate what social media platforms are supposed to allow. But what he's proposing is that he wants Ofcom to be able to directly remove posts. And this opens up a completely, like a massive can of worms, because like, who's to say that Ofcom is any better at regulating social media than the social media platforms themselves through bots or manual people, or the community rather on X? Or also questions, should social media really be regulated? Because we're seeing so many situations where the moderators are just doing a completely terrible job. So to give Ofcom more power, I would say, is a very, very slippery slope.
I mean, it also brings to mind the sort of stuff we lived through during COVID, where posts were being removed. There was a lot of shadow banning going on from the tech companies themselves, probably at the instruction of governments. And it also makes you think of the whole censorship of stories about Hunter Biden's laptop in America. Ofcom is, of course, an independent agency. It isn't government controlled. But, you know, as we move forward technologically, we're going to have to figure out how to sort of regulate in retrospect things that, you know, move fast, break things. And we're in a whole world of pain a lot of the time, and how to now manage this is it's one of the biggest questions of our age. Now, just as I'm getting comfortable with a little bit of grok, right, you know, my sort of baby steps into the world of AI, we've now got, what is this, AR and Apple smart glasses? I mean, come on. How long is it before we're just sort of like pods with like weird avatar? I don't know.
Yeah,
tell me about smart glasses.
It sounds terrifying, but I've been using a pair of sunglasses recently, and I would have to say that after using them, smart glasses are probably the next big thing. So I'd say that you don't really use a smart watch or smart ring.
I've got
just
nothing
got a
smart
phone.
about me, Davis. I literally am just anti-smart.
Well, imagine if you could wear a pair of glasses and it's got a little camera in it, and you could look at a street sign and ask it to translate it from Italian to English. That's sort of the future that we're moving towards. And Meta, who's currently the leader in the space, have sold over 1 million of their smart glasses, and that's made everyone take a look. For example, a few weeks ago, I think we covered a story where Google was going to introduce smart glasses, and and with real-time translations, which is very exciting. But this week, Apple apparently is tipped to launch their own smart glasses, as in to actually like popularize the segment. And as we know, when Apple introduces something, everyone buys it. And they've actually been working on it since 2015. So I'm just like wondering, would you ever want to wear a pair of never?
No, because I'll tell you what, Davis, and I'm a little bit older than you, but when I go to a foreign country where I don't speak the language, part of the challenge and the enjoyment is engaging brain and trying to sort of figure out what the menu says, or trying to sort of understand conversations and actually use the old grey matter that God gifted me, rather than becoming some sort of sluggish passenger to a world of technology controlled by Lord knows who. I think it sort of strips out the very meaning of humanity. Look, give me half an inch, Davis, and I'm living in a cave and sort of like, you know, rubbing twigs together to make fire, because I'm like I said, I'm a proper technophobe and a Luddite. But I'm sure there are people out there who are looking forward to get their smart glasses, and when you get yours, Davis, at least I'll give them the walk around the newsroom to see what they're all about. Thank you ever so much, Mr. Davis Fang, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be taking a short break now. When I come back, I'd love to hear from you. Going to read out some of your messages. The number, if you want to contribute, you've still got a brief small window, 03444 991 1000. You can WhatsApp me on that, will be patched through to the studio normal network rate. 87222 on the text. Right talk before your message. Back after this.
There are lots of people now who are excited and enthused by the prospect of being in social media, becoming little mini stars, because that's the sort of world we find ourselves in now. Everybody wants fame for 5 minutes, and that was their route to doing it. And I just hope, actually, the fact that they've been convicted reminds the whole of the nation that no matter how crazy an idea you've got in your head, you need to respect people and the community and the country in which you live.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. Good morning. Now, apparently Ukraine is ready to meet with Russia. This is after Putin has called for peace talks on Thursday. We're now learning that actually, perhaps for the first time, Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin might come face to face, or at least their ambassadors, to talk about what putting down weapons might look like. So that is an interesting one to keep our eye on over the course of next week. But one thing that I think the Labour Party wants to do is to try and, in one of their fights against Farage, to try and recoup some ground after losing a safe seat up in Runcorn and looking at those local election results, is they're really going to, I think, go after Nigel Farage and pretend, I think it's a confected argument, pretend he's got some sort of undying affection for Putin and relationship with Russia. I know, Nigel, he doesn't, end of. But Reform's Deputy Leader, Richard Tice, was quizzed about it this morning as he did the media rounds and at the hands of Trevor Phillips again.
Does Nigel Farage still think that the West provoked Russia's invasion and that Vladimir Putin is still a man he admires?
No, of course he doesn't think that. The reality is...
Well, that's what he said.
No, the reality is that mistakes have been made along the way.
No, but Putin, that's what he said.
Trevor, ask me a question.
Richard,
let me answer.
Richard, he said.
We all want peace, right?
It is ridiculous. Did the West provoke Putin? Well, arguably, yes. I mean, loads of people have said that over the course of history about expansionism, and especially the EU going in, wanting Ukraine to become a member, didn't particularly go down well in Russia. Does that condone or exonerate invading a country and being a general all-round bad human being? No, I think that's very easy to package off. And I remember when Nigel made the comments about Vladimir Putin being a strong leader. Well, I hate the man, but he's not exactly some sort of, weird Ed Davey wet weekend, is he? Ed Davey might fall off a jet ski. Putin's got a one-man weird little submersible he goes down in. Anyway, I think you're going to hear a lot more of this going forward. I think it's going to be the play, but let's pretend Nigel Farage likes Putin. We've heard it all before. That's right. Russia did Brexit, didn't they? I mean, come on. It is like the new sort of game of how to beat the populace. Let's say it's all about Russia. Just grow up. I just don't think it works with the general public anymore. Right, I want to read some of your messages out now because lots have been coming in over the course of the show, and then I'm going to be joined by the wonderful Peter Cardwell in the studio, and I want to ask him all about Boris Johnson because it's ended up being an accidental thread throughout today's programmes. But on other subjects we've been talking about, Sue says it should be illegal to make pornographic material in this country. Now, Sue, I hate the scourge of pornography more than anybody, right? I don't think you can make making pornography illegal, but if it's two consenting adults who should be regulated as actors and actresses and have all the protections in place, and if it doesn't involve, sort of latent criminality such as, underage stuff with animals, etc., then adults should be allowed to make such content and watch such content. What you can't have is any old person secretly filming something on a Saturday night, putting it up on the internet, and any old person on the other side of the world watching it. That is crazy. It is crazy town. I think we also need to bring back a degree of shame when it comes to the recent normalisation of pornography and some of the things that it contains. You hear especially young people thinking that strangling people is a perfectly nice and normal behaviour. It's not. It is gross, and women don't want that. Joanna! Yay, I've asked. Johanna, I didn't know what to... Joanna in Salisbury, I asked how to pronounce her name. Hi, Alex, there are some things, thankfully, like you, that could never be replicated by AI. You are just unique. I'll tell you what, though, AI's going so far that someone could probably look at my mannerisms, download my voice, and then I could have a Sunday lie-in, and instead you might have Robo-Alex. So, I mean, I don't know whether that would still involve being paid. If I copyrighted myself and then said to my big boss at Talk, don't worry, you can have me any time of day and night. You just press this button and I'll present a show, but I don't actually have to be here. Would I still be paid? I don't know. Would I mind? Do you know what? I think the more things go to AI and the less we actually have to do, it's what I was saying to Davis, the less you actually engage with brain, the more the brain rot sets in. I think the more depressed we become when we're not using our human faculties and capabilities. I remember when I was at university and I used to drive my little old Mini, proper old one, a Mini Mayfair, from Gloucester up to Durham. I used to use maps to get about the place. I used to know that I was on this motorway, leaving at this junction. If something went wrong and I had to pull over and come off the motorway and reroute myself, we didn't have Google Maps back then. You'd actually have to get out the Ordnance Survey and figure it out. Now I wouldn't know what to do, because that part of your brain and your reasoning seems to become redundant, and it does rot. And then the more you have the brain rot, the more you're disengaged with actually interacting with other human beings or thinking for yourself. I think the more depressed we become. Now, on the subject of Boris, Eddie says, Boris is no idiot, but he is a fool, a shambolic buffoon, basically. Phil says, hi Alex, I've been driving from Tring to Doncaster to visit my mum, been listening since 6 a.m. Great show, keeps me going. I don't know if you've now arrived in Doncaster, so have missed me giving you a shout out. But on the subject of mum, I just want to say, it's my mum's birthday today. I know you're watching. My mum always watches everything I do. It's so cute. She's my #1 fan and primary listener. So I hope she is still tuned in. If you are, happy birthday, Leslie Phillips. Turning, well, something that starts with a 7 today. And hello, your birthday's coming up soon as well, isn't it? Because I've had the sort of Cardwell memo of don't buy me presents, just turn up for an ease up.
I thought I was your #1 fan, but clearly,
fight my mum for
mother
it.
has pipped to the post. Yes, I think we should have a little, maybe a thumb war. You know, like a thumb war.
Right. I wouldn't go up against my mum.
No.
She's blooming good at DIY and has strange superhuman strength for a woman of her age.
I'll concede the point.
Boris Johnson,
yes.
Right? So I've asked today, because he's back in circulation, isn't he? You know, he's popping up in columns and in newsrooms, and you kind of think he's sort of smelling the rotten flesh of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't want to come back to
sense the beard, not blood.
Now, we asked our audience whether, you know, people like Boris and would like him back, because Luke Trill did a poll saying he could beat reform. All of this audience seemed to think no. As much as I love Boris, there's no way he can fix the Conservative Party. I used to back Boris, not anymore. We don't want illegal, it says illegal migraines here. I think it's migrants, but it's been I
don't want an illegal migraine either.
No one wants an illegal migraine.
No, definitely not.
Or net zero. You had your chance, Boris.
Illegal paracetamol.
Exactly. You had your chance, Boris. Bog off. Hi, Alex. Boris Johnson would be a massive mistake for the Conservative Party. And then this person says, I've heard a rumour that he will stand in Stratford-upon-Avon. Apparently that's going around local politics in Warwickshire. Sean, in Warwickshire, you heard it here first. Do you think there's going to be... He did say hasta la vista, didn't he, his last time as Prime Minister?
I think people have a moment in politics. It's very difficult to come back. There aren't that many stories of politicians going away and coming back, maybe in the pendulum politics of the 1970s, but things are very, very different now. And I think Boris Johnson, to many people, they love him, they think he's a great